Can we start, please? Good morning and welcome, everybody, to our next formal meeting. Good to see you. Apologies for absence. I've got Damien, Alan, Shee, the Siddiqui, Joe Dobson, Mel Howard attending. Mel, nice to see you again. Anything else? Okay. Declaration of interests. Don't think we've got any new ones to declare. He says, looking round. No, thank you. Minutes of the meeting of the 1st of Feb. Are they okay for accuracy? I'll take silence to be assent. Thank you. The action log is for noting. There's a red item there on the strategy. Can we just make sure we pick that up later when we do the publication of the strategy, if that's okay? Right, we then have our storytelling about children and young persons. I know Wendy's going to introduce it. We've got Nina and Phil, I think, online. I think I can see you both. Hiya, welcome.
Good morning.
Morning.
Hiya. Wendy, are you going to do the introductions for me?
Very briefly. So thank you, Nina and Phil and Stacey. Welcome, Stacey, as well. Thank you.
Good morning, Stacey. I didn't see you there and I apologise.
Morning, thank you, it's fine.
Thank you. So yeah, without any further ado, just very brief introduction from me. Of course, we recognising the Integrated Care Partnership Strategy that the early years really matter in and amongst our communities, really, and so we're all about trying to support our young people to get the best start in life. And the 360,000 children and young people that we have across South Yorkshire, we know that a number of those live in difficult situations, in poverty, often housing, employment, substance misuse, can be all sorts of different things going on in people's lives. So really welcome the guys here. I'm going to give you a little bit of an indication about that, a little bit of information about that, and then bring it to life. Stacey, your particular role really brings to life for me the importance of peer support, as we've heard previously some stories around the disability notice. And so I'm just going to hand it straight over to the team.
Thank you.
Mark, you're driving the slides, I believe, aren't you? Thank you.
Hi, my name's Nina Slate. I'm Service Director for Education Early Start Prevention in Barnsley Council. And I just wanted to thank you this morning for giving Phil, Stacey and I the opportunity to present this, this storytelling piece. And, you know, I'm sure from this presentation it will support and get us thinking as a system around how we can impact on and mitigate the impact of poverty on children and young people, whether that's through educational outcomes, reducing health inequalities. So there's lots in here for us to think about how we can work together to improve. So I'll hand over to Phil and Stacey. Thank you.
Hi everyone. I'm conscious that I think you've got control of the slides in the meeting itself. So what I'll do is I'll just probably say next slide every time we need to move it on, if that's okay. However, so yeah, if we could go to the first slide, please. So this morning we're going to talk about a case, a child and family that we're currently working with in the Youth Justice Service, and hopefully that'll give us an opportunity to evidence the work we do as part of a partnership, and I suppose the resources we have as a multi-agency service, really, and the benefits of that. But before we do look at the case, we felt it important to just touch base really in terms of the context, and it's important to recognise that link between poverty and offending. So as you can see on the slide, the Nuffield Foundation clearly make that link, as do the Telegraph in a separate report. I'm not going to read them verbatim for you because I want to get to the case study itself, but I think crucially what we can see is from a research perspective, there's a real impact on cognitive development, as a result of poverty, which I'm sure you all know yourselves. And then, that impacts on life expectancy and also mental health. And for us, these are all issues that we then recognise in children when they enter the criminal justice system. So in a sense, you're seeing, I suppose, poverty is an underpinning driver, but then we see these issues manifest themselves and they then propel the child potentially towards the criminal justice system. So if we could just move to the next slide, please. So I think from our perspective, this is really helpful because, you know, the Child Poverty Action Group have pretty much nailed this for us. You know, poverty from a child's perspective isn't just, I'm hungry, you know, I've not got the best clothes, you know, I look a scruff compared to my friends, all of which are, you know, real concerning issues. It's all, you know, this slide really evidences the more nuanced challenges that children are facing and that, you know, we're having to work with, whether that's from, you know, in school, being targeted, bullied, their own self-worth and the sense of, you know, can they have aspiration, fear and worry, you know, that you know, children growing up in households where there is poverty and where there are the other contributory secondary factors. We absolutely know that children are acutely aware of that and you know, are living it, but probably feel powerless. And then, you know, there's a real sense within communities, even communities where you've got prevalent working class families, you know, there's always a hierarchy, you know, based on poverty and what you have and haven't got. And I think we all know that that's absolutely more magnified than ever before with the expectations upon young children with things like technology and clothes and fashion, etc. So I think what we can really look to do now is offer that background in the context of the case study itself. So if we could move to the next slide, please. Okay, so the child we're currently working with is subject to a youth rehabilitation order. Now that means that the child's already offended previously. So we've got a child who is absolutely in the criminal justice system. If we look at the offences, they're all linked to financial gain, acquisitive offences. The current one's for fraud, but previous to that it was car theft. And certainly car theft itself provides a significant additional risk around the well-being of the child and the public, due to obviously when children are driving, it immediately places the public and themselves at risk. What we knew as we came into this case was that this family had a real distrust of professionals. They'd got a long history of professionals trying to work with them, but it'd been very, very difficult for professionals to make any progress at all. Dad himself was supposedly aggressive, you know, and he had got a fixed view. When we had some initial kind of engagement with him, his view was, you know, my son needs to learn the hard way. He needs locking up because that did me no harm. So you'd got kind of a real fixed view there that was going to be a real challenge to work with. The family itself, as we'll get onto in the next slide, was a real was in a challenging position. Mum herself was not really on the scene in terms of the family and being a parent due to her substantive substance misuse and chaotic lifestyle. So a lot of the pressure was on Dad himself to raise his son. And so, you know, what we knew when we started with the case that we'd got some real challenges. We could just go to the next slide again, please. So in the Youth Justice Service, we really undertake a thorough analytical assessment. You know, that's the underpinning for us of the work that we're going to undertake. And what we were able to obtain from that initial assessment was, you know, some real challenging issues for the family. So again, you've got the underpinning poverty that was evident. The family were reliant on state benefits. We could see the child himself was really struggling in school. He'd been permanently excluded, and crucially as well, there was no sense of any attachment to anyone in education. And as you'll see from our work, you know, having that underpinning relationship is vital for a child who's in adversity, because fundamentally they need someone who they can confide in and can use as a role model. Substance misuse was like a, you know, I wouldn't say a golden thread, a really negative thread throughout the whole of the family. So mum was a crack cocaine user, and we all know how that really impacts on the user's life. Whilst we'd got a scenario where the child himself at 14 was actually using cocaine daily. So cocaine's expensive, you know. The big question, you know, the big elephant in the room is, how was he able to finance that in a family that was absolutely, you know, struggling financially? We know he offended. So the family, you know, the family was subject to free school meals, which again, you know, leading us back to the slide around the impact on children. You know, that's a negative badge, if you like, for children, isn't it? That they're one of the free school meals children. Dad himself, as we've touched on, with custody experience. So, you know, we knew that there were potential issues we were going to have to really work with around attitude and kind of Dad's real outlook on life, and also the potential impact he was having on his son. And of course, you've got domestic abuse there, unfortunately, which we know has a real significant impact on everyone involved, and that ripple effect to those, that violence in the family household, which absolutely was linked to the mental health that was evident throughout too. Mum and dad both had significant mental health issues, and then throughout the course of our more recent work with him, that the health issues were further developed with dad being diagnosed with cancer, which, as we all know, would have been really challenging again to manage. So what did we do? If we could just move to the next slide, please. So I think what we wanted to show today was some of the strategies we use to really try and get from that real deficit position, that position of real challenge, into the position that we'll be able to reveal shortly. So our work is absolutely underpinned by a relational approach. If you cannot build a rapport and some sense of trust between the child, the family, and our team, we're not going to get anywhere. You can have, and the slide below talks about an effective allocation of specialist expert practitioners. Brilliant. We've got all the resources going, and we're really proud of the fact we've got this crack team. But if you can't build a relationship with the family, it's no good having them, because the family won't let you through the door. And I think what we really did in the first instance was spend just time with the family. And time's crucial. We all know that. And many, many professionals don't have the luxury of time. However, we were able to carve out that time just to gain that trust. And then through a coordinated and focused plan that addressed the issues we've just looked at, we were able to use the provision we have in youth justice. So we've got CAMHS practitioners, we've got substance misuse workers, we have a dedicated parenting offer. And Stacey, who's here obviously and will be talking to you shortly, was able to act as almost like a glue in terms of the challenges we have within education too. So once we'd built the relationship and we'd developed the plan, we were able to call on a really focused team of professionals who were all working to a single plan. And again, that's an obvious thing, but not always an easy thing to achieve, particularly when you may have a number of specialist professionals working within a family that aren't necessarily part of the same service. But we were able to really work towards a single plan. And then that plan was underpinned by everyone understanding the need to build towards it, like a sense of resilience within the family. So the approach was very much around advocacy. It was working with them. What do they want? Their voice had to be central to everything. And I think what we saw with that was Dad's real transition. Dad became someone who got what we were trying to do and then took it upon himself to drive that too. So and I think Stacey will be able to bring that to life a bit more. Dad became a big advocate of everything we were doing. So his whole approach changed and he opened himself up then for his own care. So we were able to link him in, as the next slide shows, into support through Macmillan with his cancer. So, we absolutely got a significant shift in everyone in the family. If we could just move to the next slide, please. So this is where we can show what progress we've made. Again, as I've just said, the family moved to full engagement with services for the first time. That included us getting support from them from a financial perspective, but also crucially obtaining mental health support. And then again with Dad, we managed to link him in with Macmillan. Poverty's not necessarily changed for the family in the sense that what we can't do is give them a significant amount of money. What we have to do, though, however, is link them in with services who can support them. So we did support them. We linked them in, and over Christmas, I don't know if you did that actually, Stacey. Were you part of that team that did the Christmas run around food bank? But the family, was supported to ensure they had a really good Christmas in terms of food and also presents and what have you. Which again just takes that pressure off. This is the bit I think we're really, really excited about. I'm going to skip to just saying, we have been able to ensure a reduction in substance misuse for all, and you can see it in the child's own reflection. Work and college come before drugs. I don't need drugs to get a job. And this is where I think it's important for Stacey to come in. We've moved now to a position where he's got an actual engineering program, which is the route to a trade. And as it says here, I'm buzzing. I told you I'd start soon. So this is a child who had absolutely no real sense he could do anything, to a child who this week has started his first week in college. So I don't know if you want to talk a bit about that, Stacey, because Lithered on for long enough, haven't I now?
Yeah, no problem. Morning everyone. Yeah, I'm Stacey. I'm quite new to Youth Justice Service. So I started in November, previously working in education for the last 11 years. So I've yeah, it's quite a new shape up, but still obviously working with young people to support their education or training. So I picked this case up when I started in November. And as Phil said, it's been quite a long running thing with family in terms of turning things around for them. And since I've come into service, all I can see is that the young people that do come into our service get an absolutely fantastic offer really from us as a youth justice. So like Phil said, support around his substance misuse was significant. But in terms of my role, I started a little bit of work with this young man and I thought, I'm not sure where we're going to go with it. But he sort of completely changed that. And I think a turning point for him and for us were, it were about to, it were closing to our service. And in doing that, it showed a real concern. It were going to lose these, appropriate adults that he'd built trust up within his life, and it showed significant worry that he were going to lose these adults. But during this time, like Phil said, we've supported him, and I feel like I've sort of just come along in November and put the bow on top of the present really. And I'm not minimising my work with him, but I felt like a bit of a proud parent moment on Monday morning. So I sort of, because I've worked in the college for 11 years, I had them, I could move things a little bit faster than probably what somebody that hadn't done with this young man. So I arranged all his visits and everything. We spoke to safeguarding, made sure that they had all correct information regarding his previous offending, looking after his safety and others. So he went to his first interview now. The substance misuse worker took him along to this because I was on some training at the time, and he were permanently excluded from mainstream school in previous years. He were permanently excluded from a specialist school, and his educational experience were really, really poor. So I wanted to ensure that was shaped in that best way that it could be really. So he went for his interview. He did absolutely fantastic. They were running a little bit behind. He was patient. He engaged in conversations, showed genuine interest in this engineering provision. So again, he were like, when I spoke to him after I met him, I went through a bit of paperwork so we could look at his support needs and what he'd need because of that gap. And his confidence and his self-esteem has just grown significantly in last few months of just that work with him. So like Phil said, when I spoke to him and I looked at some paperwork and we talked about his substance misuse and how that could impact his education, and they were his words, work, and college do come before drugs now, whereas not too long ago that were complete opposite. And then I rung a member of our team while she was on a visit with him. I said, do you want to let him know he can start on Monday? And again, they were his words, buzzing. I told you I could start soon, and he were really excited. So spoke to family on Friday just gone, and said, I'll support him transport, because again, there's dad's off for his chemo and treatment and stuff, and financially they've not always got that money there to support him with transport and stuff. So I sort of filled that gap a little bit. So I picked him up Monday. He was still in bed when I knocked on the door, which I was surprised. I was just that hopeful person at that front door thinking, is he going to be here anyway? Out he came, and the first thing he said to me when he got in car, he said, do I have to stay today? And I said, well, yeah, this is your first day. And and I said, why? What did you think? And I said, are you worried? Are you anxious? And I said, that's normal. So we had this journey, probably 20-25 minutes. Took him in. It was like, taking your child for the first day at nursery, probably. Took him in. He saw people he knew. We saw people he'd had conflict with in past. And I'm thinking, how's it going to go? So we took him up. He sat down and they sort of gave him an option to whether he wanted to stay that day. And they were actually delivering they were going to some sort of enrichment talk where they were looking at substance misuse and knife crime. And straight away when he heard that, his ears popped up and he said, I want to stay. So off I left him, and following up with staff at the college have said what a fantastic young man he is, and for me that's just the absolute it's priceless really in terms of his journey from from having them appropriate adults to build that trusting relationship up. And hopefully he might have come across some barriers in his way in his education, but hopefully we can continue to support him to be successful. And he were there yesterday in a maths lesson. He's not done maths for the last 4 years, and he looked at his timetable, and I thought he's not going to sit with this, because there's a lot of classroom work, and he's been out of education for so long. And when course leader said to him, "This is it, you don't have to do them extra sessions," and he said, "What are they?" She says, "The maths and English." He said, "That's what I need most." He said miss, he called her miss. Nice, you could see that quite childhood thing in him, but he said, "That's what I need, miss." So he could see that as a young person that's missed that education, that's what he needed. So that's it in a nutshell for me, really, and it's quite exciting and a really successful story for us as a service to share, really. So thank you.
Great, cheers, Stacey. So we've just got a slide or two left, which I'll whip through, and then we can look for reflections. So, I've put your reflection of slide too late, Stacey. Anyway, so what we've really got then is a child clearly that we've been able to positively support. Poverty remains, but I think our approach, I don't want to dwell on it. Our approach really allowed us to move forward, and that's underpinned by, as I've said, the relational approach, which means we absolutely invest in that underpinning relationship. But we're lucky in many respects that we do have a skilled team of specialist professionals that are able to work with us hand in glove. So we work cohesively together for all those issues that arise for this and many families. And again, it's about having a single plan. So what we're able to do in youth justice is coordinate a single plan, and we have planning processes within that really test that out. And then as we have managers who check on the plans, we have supervisions, all of which ensures that we do our best to ensure that the plan that we feel the family needs is adhered to. So then really it's just moving on to the last couple of questions, which were just maybe something to consider. I suppose the big fundamental question is, why should a child have to commit crime to get the type of service that the child and family received? It feels like it's something that doesn't necessarily feel it's appropriate in many respects, because we don't want any child to enter the criminal justice system, because that in itself is a significant barrier to future life chances. And then I suppose what we're seeing in the criminal justice system anyway is a real shift towards prevention. So if we don't want children in the criminal justice system, we're working more and more in the prevention space. So the query and question maybe, or the issue for discussion potentially is there an ability to kind of use a similar model to youth justice as such, but in the prevention space, or in the space where we're looking at targeted youth services, because we feel it absolutely works. And then for me, I suppose it's around acknowledging if we've been able to make some ensure some success, how do we ensure that services are able to share that success too, and understand what has worked? Because the biggest concern for us would be, after our work finishes, there's a lapse of a few months, and then another service picks up, and then because of a negative experience, dad and family fall back into that negative interpretation of professionals. So I suppose it's around, how do we, even though youth justice services had some success, we ensure that those approaches, I suppose, translate then into any other future interventions with a family. So that's it. I think now it's open to any queries, questions, or reflections.
Edith Phillips, that was really, really good. I enjoyed that. It was fascinating. And the bit that 2 or 3 things struck in my mind before I ask a question. One is, it's about relationships, isn't it? If you don't strike them, there's no chance. And I think, and the other thing that's obvious from that is that takes time. And one of the problems we don't always do well is give some of our professionals time to do the kind of relationship building that allows you to do some other work. Really difficult given the challenges we're under, but actually that was so many messages in that. I thought that was great. Let me see if there's people want to ask questions. Chris, got your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. So the key word for me in all of this was trust. And trust in service is a recurring theme in some of the work we're coming through. So when we find a professional that can gain trust of a family, how do we then get the rest of the services to come in on the back of that? I think that's when you join everything up and have a single plan for family. I think that was a really important point.
Yeah, that's right. Any other points people want to raise? Wendy. and then Moira.
Yeah, it's I do sort of like the word navigation really, and I think there's just somebody that roles like Stacey. I mean, Stacey, you're sort of almost like, I know you're just a recent entrant to the team, but that role of navigation and the word alongside also sticks with me as well. So people that can get alongside individuals, and often it is, isn't it, Phil, Stacey, it's often family, that family unit, rather than taking an illness-based, silo-based approach, mental health, substance misuse, another strand, but you know, can't pay the bills, just being all these different strands. It's about how we get an holistic sense of that family's need, work alongside them, and people like Stacey that stick with the family through thick and thin. And the point that Phil, I think, was really the challenge. I think, Phil, you were giving to us was one of sustainability. So
Absolutely.
you have to, you know, that service has to exit from that family because it's got other families' needs to meet. How do we make sure that the other services, and hopefully the family don't need anything else from us, and they build their own resilience and sustainability? But over time, if there is a blip, how do we make sure that whatever service they do enter into delivers on that same relational based approach rather than a silo based approach? So I mean, huge thanks to you for sharing. It's very insightful and looked at poverty through a different lens.
I agree. Really hard. Moira, and then I think Lee. Moira.
Yeah, really moving sort of presentation. Thank you very much. Just in terms of how we go forward, I mean, it is about early help, isn't it? And how do we get to the point where people don't have to commit crimes to get care support? So I was just wondering about how we can work together, particularly with education from a very early age, to actually pick up some of these families and family care to actually provide that level of support before it gets to the point where kids, you know, end up in the situation that you've described. So it's obviously a challenge for us, isn't it? But I think if we're talking about early intervention and addressing family inequalities, we do need to see how we can actually get support in there.
Nina, you wanted to come in.
Yeah, just on that, actually, I think it is about thinking pre-birth onwards in terms of, you know, what is our, across all phases from, you know, the moment, you know, a woman finds out she's having a baby and or even a prospective parents, what's our offer from that pre-birth through early years and then into that formal education and how that links, you know, our schools are seeing children every day. So it's about that whole system approach. And I think that prevention, early help model in communities where those relationships and trust can build, where there's a trusted advocate or support in an area, in a community, is absolutely vital. So the work that we're doing through our family hubs, the Supporting Families framework, it's really important that the system comes together around that and that we all think around that real community-based, place-based support, because that's where relationships and trust start. Thank you.
I agree, Nina. And there's something for me about, you know, and you're quite right, Philip, to say before they commit offences. We should know many of the families who need the kind of support that you've described, shouldn't we? How do we get the support to them in under 5, pre-birth? You're right, because that's the conversation where we've got a chance, for me, of making a difference.
Yeah.
And look, in the NHS in particular, we've always been a responsive service. When you come in, we try and sort you out. If there's ever a message about getting out early intervention, it's this kind of stuff. Because what if we made the same intervention, Philip, when the child was 3?
Exactly.
Because that's the kind of thing we should be thinking about, isn't it?
And
Absolutely.
It's thinking about the whole family. So not only as the parents in their parenting capacity, but adults in their own right. So like in this case, you know, support to dad himself in terms of his cancer diagnosis. So it's thinking about, you know, adults and the skills and abilities and building their esteem, which inevitably then impacts on parenting capacity and skills. So it's seeing that whole family picture and then coordinating that specialist response. So this isn't about diluting professions at all, but it's about bringing in with that shared sense of purpose, principle and value, And then how does that then translate into active decision making and support for families? Because we'll all sign up to across the system. Yeah, we do share these values. Children and young people's outcomes are important to us. You know, outcomes are important, but it's how that translates into actual delivery and decision making at every point. So if you're in a primary school and thinking, I can't cope with this young person anymore, I'm going to suspend them. That decision at that point in time then takes you down a different path, and it's how we can mitigate and support families through that phase, but also seeing parents as adults and adults as parents and the impact that it has on family life.
Great, really helpful. Lee.
Thank you. That was a really moving story. It was a really moving story, and thank you. I was going to ask a question about sort of pre-youth justice intervention, but I think we've covered that. And I think we should be able to identify some of these families. It was more about how we sustain this intervention. So self-evidently, you can't keep taking him to college every day because there'll be other case holders and clients that'll be needed. I was just wondering, just in terms of your map of wider community assets, wider family members, these families get really socially excluded, and it's really easy to slip back. How could we sustain this intervention really well? So your case studies where you go, these are your really big successes, and you manage to sustain the intervention. With that cancer diagnosis, it's really easy for this lad to slip back. So how do we sustain this, and how do you draw on perhaps voluntary sector, or what do we do about? We use a phrase very glibly, I think, about community asset building. I use it a lot, but I'm not quite sure I know what it means. So how do we do some of that work?
I mean, a lot of I suppose there's two arms to this, really. There's the why, absolutely right, the other family members, voluntary sector, other support that's in an area, but it's about that clear plan in terms of that family being able to own and sustain the gains that they've made, because it's them that's been, so we're supporting very intense support at the beginning, but it's how then you scaffold and shape and transition that, you know, I'm sure within a couple of weeks, if not sooner, the young lad ain't going to be wanting to be taken to college by Stacey. He's going to be thinking about how do I, in terms of independence and preparation for adulthood, it's around then through this confidence and that support, transitioning it in terms of this is where you can get wider support, and then building trust in themselves. So it very much is based on behaviour change theory around being able to see where you are, building your confidence that you can help and support yourself, and building that resilience. So I think there's some individual work that takes place in terms of that behaviour change model, but then also it's working as partners to say, where do we step in and what role do we play moving forward? And that involves community assets, whether that's, you know, community activists, voluntary sector, or more organised work through statutory services.
And I think just to say, in this case in particular, the fact that we've been able to get him to a position where he's in college is a real benefit, because college themselves have a pastoral system and network, and Stacey's role is funded, you know, by partners. It's a role that we recognise was needed to that final push for children like this one, who previously we didn't necessarily have the resource to get, you know. So Stacey's role is to really almost convert the chances we have with these children and get them over the line. And I think this is you know, Stacey's, like she said, only 3 months in role. If there's ever a case that proves why it was so important to employ her and employ this position, it's this one, because it's her work that got this child into that institution that is able to provide the protection and support as we retreat, really. But I think it is an important point to make, though, because I think you're right in so much as if we don't have a step down that feels like there's some credibility to it, and you know, there are some aspects where you can support or someone supporting the family, there is a risk that you know, they do retreat back into negative behaviour cycles. And I think we're working constantly to evolve that. And Barnsley, specific to Barnsley, in the last 6 or 9 months, we've seen a real increase in the work we're trying to do with the voluntary sector to that end too, really.
Brilliant. Can I say thank you very much for your time, the three of you.
Thank you.
Really helpful. Some great messages and also a really good story. Thank you, and thank you for your work. You look after yourselves.
Thank you.
Cheers now.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bringing that to us. Okay, can we move on to the agenda? We have questions from members of the public. A lot of them relate to agenda items, Andy, don't they? Which we're going to pick up under the strategy. Is there any that we need to take up, or do you want to do that at the end, see if there's any outstanding?
I think you can take them at the end. We'll do it.
Okay, thank you. Chairs matters, there's nothing I want to pick up other than one thing, which is I think we've all taken some heart from the fact that the government are actually in discussion with the nursing unions, and the strike at least has been delayed for a while. I think we're all hoping and praying that results in something. Anyone who was vaguely connected to the NHS realised that what I would have called the enhanced strike from the nursing unions looked to us deeply worrying. So let's hope that this is permanently off rather than a temporary delay. That's all I have to say. Gavin, can I hand over to you?
Thanks, Chair. So, I mean, as usual, there's a report in the pack, so I won't go through that in detail, but there are a few things that I wanted to pull out. So the first was around kind of, I suppose, the here and now, some of the operational challenges. You know, industrial action is a big part of that, and as Priya says, there's some encouraging signs, particularly in relation to the Royal College of Nursing and the government. But over the last month, we've seen industrial action from obviously the nurses, the ambulance service unions associated with them, but also Royal College of Physiotherapists as well. So I think these have been managed well by the system, but they have presented a significant challenge, and we're not out of the woods yet. And obviously we've seen the ballot from the junior doctors, the BMA, and we're anticipating a 72-hour strike between the 13th of March and the 15th of March, and I think that could be really challenging as well. So it's a very difficult kind of context in terms of industrial relations, and I've got huge sympathy for professional colleagues who I think find themselves in a very difficult position, but at the same time we're trying to balance delivering safe services for the communities we serve. So it's a difficult time. On top of that, we've got the challenges of increasing demand, particularly for urgent and emergency care, being felt in primary care and the out of hours 111 service, but also in acute hospitals, mental health providers as well. So I think it's probably fair to say that we had an exceptionally challenging month in December. I think pressures eased. I think after Christmas, I think particularly in relation to the reduction in respiratory illness. But I think it's probably fair to say we're seeing that beginning to track up. And one of the big focuses at the moment within the system is on releasing capacity, particularly within hospitals, in order to maintain flow. And there's been some, I think, really good work being done between, I think, place teams, acute providers and the local authorities to try and increase the ease at which patients can move out of hospital into their next place of care. And we've had some additional funding nationally to help us to do that. So, that's being put to good use within the system. I think just finishing off the kind of the operational piece, one of our key areas of focus is on elective recovery, and there's a couple of milestones at the end of this month. One is particularly around trying to eliminate patients waiting over 78 weeks for treatment. Really pleased to say that in terms of our hospital providers, 4 out of 5 will achieve that standard. Probably with just one organisation with probably the biggest challenge. Sheffield Teaching Hospitals with complexity and volume making good progress, but probably won't be able to deliver that position by the end of March. But I am confident that no stone is being left unturned, and there's good discussions happening across the system around mutual aid and what support other organisations can offer. And there's also a residual number of 104-week waiters. These are particularly complex elective specialist cases at Sheffield Teaching Hospital, and again, there's a focus on trying to reduce those to the bare minimum. So still considerable challenges. We'll pick up on the agenda planning, but as often happens, the last quarter of the year feels the most challenging operationally, but it's also the year that we try to do all of the planning work. So I think it is quite a pressured time, but I think really good progress being made around the ICS strategy together with our partners. We'll get an update on that, but really looking forward to the launch of that strategy for the by the end of the month. We're also working on a 5-year plan for the NHS, which we need to complete by the end of July. But really, that's a way of, how do we as NHS organisations transact the ambition that's set out in that system strategy developed with our partners. And then I guess even more detailed, I guess, is the operating plan for the next couple of years following the publication of the planning guidance just before Christmas. There's a real focus on planning, but making sure that we obviously deliver the aims of the planning guidance, which are principally focused on improving access, so for elective care, emergency care, primary care, but at the same time making sure that there's a clear golden thread from that system strategy running through our operational plans within the NHS. So that was kind of I suppose the headlines, kind of I suppose emphasising some of the challenges. There is some positive news around, I think particularly around capital. So we had the board meeting back in February where we signed off the investment into 3 new health centres in Sheffield, and again with a focus on health inequalities. Really good to see those developments in some of our more deprived communities in Burngreave and in Southie Green and Parsons Cross. But it's not just in Sheffield, but also we're about to begin a 12-week consultation in Doncaster around new health centres in Rossington and Bentley, and there's also the expansion of the I think it's the Broom Lane practice in Rotherham as well. So really positive developments in primary care. Had some good news over the last month with the announcement of additional funding of around £15 million, which I think goes to the Doncaster and Batterslaw Trust, but is around developing an elective orthopaedic centre at the Montague Hospital in Mexborough, which is all part of the work of the Acute Federation, looking at how do we develop that as a system asset to help us address some of the challenges I've mentioned around recovering the elective treatment position. And orthopaedics is always a specialty where there's particular challenges because there's huge demand. So it's great to see that. Alongside that, we've seen approval of funding around £5 million to further expand the Glassworks Community Diagnostic Centre, which I think has been a huge success. In the shopping centre there in the centre of Barnsley. But the extra funding would enable us to increase the range of clinical investigations that are available to members of the public in that facility, particularly things like CT and MR. So some of that more complex imaging will be, believe it or not, available, in a shopping centre in the middle of town. I think can't help but think it's a great model, and perhaps one we'd like to see developed elsewhere. And then finally, just on capital, again another positive story. It was good to see the National Centre for Child Health Technology and I suppose the funding coming together with a contribution from the South Yorkshire Mayoral Combined Authority last month, which will enable that facility, which will be a national asset to be developed on the Olympic Legacy Park in Sheffield. So it'll be a real asset for the system, but actually this is a national facility, so I think it's really good to see that facility being developed in South Yorkshire. And I guess just finally, just reflecting on the story that we just heard, clearly it won't surprise people, but a major focus of the ICS strategy that we publish at the end of the month will be on children and young people, and particularly a focus on health inequality, but particularly in early years, and how do we work collectively as a system to give children in South Yorkshire the best possible start in life. The strategy will also focus on prevention, how we increase economic participation, but also how we look at workforce in its in a sort of holistic way. So not just workforce in informal organisations, in health and care, but also in the voluntary sector and also unpaid carers as well. It was great to see, over the last month, the health inequalities event at the in Rotherham at the football stadium in Rotherham, which was, I think Ben, you did a lot of the work to set that up, but it was great to see the whole system coming together with a focus on health inequalities, which is a major sort of facet of the strategy. I think just finally, again with an eye on children, young people, it's great to see that the Children Young People's Alliance in South Yorkshire has been identified as one of just 3 systems nationally to work alongside Bernardo's, the children's charity, and Sir Michael Marmot's health equity unit at UCL to do some focused work in this space to see what approaches are most impactful to act as I guess as learning for the whole of the country and indeed beyond. But it's also really positive to see the Acute Federation, one of our other collaboratives within South Yorkshire, being identified as one of just 9 to take part in the National Provider Collaborative Innovators Programme as well. And I think actually, I think the Acute Federation have chosen children as a particular focus and the provision of acute paediatric services across South Yorkshire. So I'll leave it there, Chair, but happy to pick up any questions on that or indeed anything else.
Gavin, thank you. Any questions for Gavin? Warren?
It may well come up in a discussion around operational plans anyway in our next item, but the issue about winter planning and making sure that, spring might be in the air, but we need to work all the summer in terms of trying to get it hopefully into a better position than we've had this year. I know how challenging it is.
I think you're absolutely right, and kind of unsurprisingly, winter does come round every year, so I don't think it should catch us unaware. Interestingly, in the planning guidance, I think there is quite a focus on that. So there is something about, so there's some good news around increased capacity in terms of general and acute beds, because it's not all about bed capacity, but actually you do need the right number of beds in order to meet the demand. There's also a focus on developing capacity within the ambulance service as well as looking at, how do we improve the urgent emergency care pathway, not just within the hospital, but looking at things like urgent community response. So there are particular, asks in the planning guidance that we'll be addressing in our operational plan. So you're right, Maura. I mean, the planning for next year starts now, or indeed has already started.
Thank you.
Any other points? Richard?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And it's probably worth noting that the strike, the industrial action, but particularly the industrial action by the junior doctors, is going to give the acute challenges around the last 4 weeks, delivering 78 weeks commitments, because it's 72 hours of strikes with no derogation, which basically means we're going to have to come to others. So I know all the accused are striving particularly hard to try to make sure that we reduce the waiting times in known width, but really that week is going to be particularly challenging on elective work and activity.
Point well made, Richard. We are all worried about it. Okay, thank you. Gavin, thank you for that. Can we move on to the place-based reports and we'll take them in order? Barnsley, Wendy?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just a few things to mention. Obviously, first I need to say as well done to Barnsley Office in terms of achieving their outstanding result. What an improvement journey that's been for them from a inadequate rating, which I believe was back in July 2021, to such a great journey. So really credit to Martin Toon there, the chief exec and her leadership team, but also really thanks to the broader health and care system in Barnsley, who wrapped their arms around the hospice and did what they should do, which is support them in their improvement journey. So thank you to our partners as well. A couple of just things to mention. Really pleased and proud of the work around the cycle social engagement team, recently recognised in the local government association, which case around all of that. So that was a 6-month pilot project where referrals made by A&E mental health liaison teams, and then people picked up as part of a 6-week intensive It's all about really early help, early intervention into individuals' lives with the aim of obviously helping them to manage their mental well-being. So I think that's been a really, really successful pilot. We've now embedded that then into the mental health pathway. So really, really pleased. That was a lovely piece of work. A couple of other things just to highlight. Really, I just wanted to highlight because we haven't really talked about it. Is about the important role around creativity and the arts and well-being. So just wanted to share with the board a little bit about what's happening in that sort of space in Barnsley. So at the moment in Barnsley, we are co-creating our cultural strategy. And over the last 12 months, I had a conversation a little while ago, about a year or so ago, with the Arts Council. So we want to really try and explore the relationship between creativity and well-being. Kicked that off last year with a creativity and well-being week. All sorts of activities going up across the town. And that was a really huge success. We've now developed a creative health plan on a page, which has got some clear ambitions. The overall vision actually for that is about living a fuller, healthier life through creativity. Our creativity and wellbeing week will take place again this year in May, and we've secured some funding for a dedicated post around working on creativity and wellbeing. And I think we'd all appreciate, and I know I've spoken to some people on this board about the importance that creativity has in their own wellbeing, whether that be about dance, song, art, textiles, whatever it is, poetry. And I guess really, good mental health really is recognising that finds a multifaceted and of equal value and importance to our physical health. So a bit of a pitch for attention to creativity and well-being, because I really do know from the stories I've heard the impact that can have positively on people's lives. So I'll leave it there. Other than to say, as a place, we're doing really well on virtual wards. To beds, I think we're around we probably between 35 to 40 in Barnsley, so really great progress. Equally, the investments on the discharge funding are helping us really. We had at one point in the last couple of weeks no people waiting for home care in Barnsley, which was a great result. And we've tapped into some of that creative use of the money on mental health to support discharges from hospital as well. So that's going pretty well. Our main pressure points in Barnsley around flow generally seem to be about intermediate care. And to that end, we've had an independent organisation coming in to do a review of intermediate care for us. That's next week, a rapid review. So we hope to get the outputs of that, and that will inform the design of that part of that pressure system for us over the coming weeks.
Wendy, thank you. Any questions for Wendy?
He's got a question. It's just a comment, actually, just following on from what Wendy's talked about in terms of creativity. At some stage, and I'm sure you've got a plan of other service user patient service stories. It'd be fantastic to know what the recovery colleges do in our places, because they're
Yeah, good idea, Mark. Thank you. Pick that up. Can you add my congratulations to Barnsley Hospice? I don't think we should underestimate getting outstanding from the CQC at the moment. Even in mathematical terms, is extraordinarily difficult. For a hospice to have made that journey, we should give them all our congratulations. It's very, very challenging to do that at the moment. So well done. Thank you. Anthony Doncaster.
Thank you, Chair. A few things I wanted to highlight from the report. We've embarked as a team Doncaster on undertaking a fairness and wellbeing commission across our city. It's chaired by Dame Rosie Winston, and we've had a number of partners involved in that work. We had our first meeting in January to kick off this work. This is really an inquiry that looks at a number of key issues that may result in our city being seen as unfair by our residents. They include barriers to work, maximising income and debt, food security, housing costs, and fuel poverty. This is an intense sort of 6-month piece of work that will come out with a recommendation report that will allow us to focus our actions across those key barriers. So we're excited about that work and the potential that it has. Equally, we've undertaken some work across another barrier, which is around digital inclusion and digital fairness across our population. We've embarked on a piece of work with our voluntary sector and our Citizens Advice Bureau about how connected are you in Doncaster about being able to use digital. And so far, we've trained over 200 learners across Doncaster and embarking on a train the trainer approach as well. So there's a real potential in some of our approaches there. As members are aware, our particular pressures around urgent and emergency care in Doncaster are acute, and we've embarked on a number of ways of addressing that. We currently have the EKIS teams in at DBTH Foundation Trust, but actually looking at it across a partnership approach, and we're taking those recommendations to our urgent and emergency care board on Friday. So there's some real areas of improvement that we can look at on that, but also some novel ways of looking at things. We've had peer support within the emergency department by our patient focus group and voluntary partners, and that's been well received as well, given the pressures that we've got. Finally, given some of the focus that we've had at previous boards on maternity services, there is some good stories in that area. We've had some developments at the DBTH site, including some refurbishment of the central delivery suite and triage areas, which is, I think, still due to be finished at the end of this month, Richard. So that helps with some of our acute estate issues that the board is aware of. Done some good work in terms of maternity voices partnership, and also highlighted at the end the great work of Club Doncaster, that as David is aware is a great organisation working around under the guise of sport within our local community, but actually works with a range of partners to support our population. And they've done some great work in pre and postnatal wellbeing courses, which have been really well attended. So just some highlights, really. The pressures remain around the urgent emergency care system, much like Wendy's described, and we're going through the process of planning for next year, just like all of our places, which is challenging, but I'm confident we've got a partnership approach to that.
Any questions, Francis? Thank you, Chris Rotherham.
Yes, welcome to Rotherham. So just a quick idea of how the things are different at a place for us. So we've just been signing off the refreshed Rotherham plan. So when we say the Rotherham plan, that's the inclusive economy plan, the building strong communities plan, the climate prevention plan, the place to be proud of plan, which we're key stakeholders in and partners. And then we also take the leading role on the health and wellbeing plan. So that's what we're working through now. It's the fourth iteration of the Rotherham Health and Care Plan. First one was 2016, and we should be signing off at April Place Board and then reporting back here on that shortly afterwards. The other thing in Rotherham, what we try to do is we position ourselves as a digital exemplar area. We've been on it's a global digital aspect, I think, is the management language. And what we try to do is we're trying to break boundaries in Rotherham, and then have the other places be fast followers is the language we use, but basically share best practice and make sure everyone benefits. The latest thing we've done is we're now part of the Yorkshire Number Record Data Consumer Project. What that means in real speed is that we'll use a shared record to detect illness earlier and treat patients more consistently. So that's something we'll hope to share back as we progress on that project. The next thing's a nice picture here of a GP digging the groundworks. But do you remember last meeting we talked about the Sheffield scheme? There's two schemes in Rotherham as part of that 57 million we got nationally, and this is where we've actually got it to building stage now, which is one of our projects. And our lead GP doctor coming there is just digging the groundworks. The other thing is to mention is we've had the busiest January, February that I can remember on record, but at the same time we're still making sure we're focusing on the prevention, health inequalities and transformation agenda. So there's a write-up here about a mental health think tank success event we had, and also Gary referred to the South Yorkshire Health Inequalities event. So this event started off as a Rotherham event, but we recognised that actually there was a better way of doing this, and we expanded it to be a South Yorkshire event. We managed to get Chris Whitty there, Chris Bentley, our Mayor Oliver Coppard. We've got 160 key stakeholders in the room, and it's hard to explain, there was a real energy in the room, like people wanting to make real change at a time when we've got system pressures like we are. It was really energising, and hopefully we can really get some positive outcomes from that. Just in terms of performance, just virtual awards again is a key thing for us. We've gone from a standing start of 0 in January, we're up to 17 as of this morning, with an ambition to get to 100. Key things with virtual awards. for us, building the clinical confidence to use the virtual wards and building system knowledge of how, when and best to use them across the system. That's the key challenge for us. But we do see virtual wards as being a key pillar in our future plans. And just the final thing is, again, being proactive and trying to work things through with hobbies, learning events with our general practice clinicians, just to really get to best practice on respiratory, understanding long COVID and making sure we've got absolutely fit for purpose respiratory pathways in the development as well.
Thank you. Chris, thanks. Any questions for Chris? Emma, Sheffield, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so the first thing I want to point out is that we've just opened a new Sheffield Mental Health and Emotional Support Service. It's on Bank Street in Sheffield, for those who know Sheffield. It offers free out-of-hours services, 365 days a year, 6 p.m. to midnight Monday to Friday, and 2 p.m. to midnight weekends. And so feedback already says it's being used quite a lot, and it's really providing a great service. So we're looking at how we can refine and develop that. We talked about the GP health centres. I was very indulgent the last board meeting to talk about that. Gavin's mentioned it, so I won't repeat that. Also, Gavin talked about the National Centre for Child Health Technology, which again, fantastic asset for Sheffield, and as Gavin said, the whole country, I guess. South Yorkshire Neighbourhood Community Projects, again, working with our most deprived communities in the north east of Sheffield, to develop 3 hubs around children and community-led, youth-led community development projects. So again, really starting to tackle some of the issues actually that we've already talked about today. How do we start to think about how we prevent some of our most vulnerable children getting into the kind of situation we've seen earlier? So we really are focusing and targeting resources in that space. And another popular thing for some of us is the Sheffield Clean Air Zone, which came into being on the 27th of February on Monday. Again, we know 500 deaths are attributable to air pollution. So again, really pleased that that's coming to Sheffield, and obviously we're working on local authority on that and the comms around that. In terms of the partnership, we had the second partnership board about 2 weeks ago in here. It was great to see how things are starting to come on, how we're shaping our Sheffield plan. As Chris has alluded to, we probably haven't had one that's really been owned by all partners in Sheffield. Pleased to say that that's coming along nicely, and we're looking to bring that back at some point to get final sign off for that in April, alongside health inequalities plan as well. It really starts to target the areas of deprivation. In terms of winter, I think we've made a real indent into our medical discharge position, which is fantastic in Sheffield. I think we have the best position we've had for the last 2 years at the end of January. Still work to do in terms of sustaining and maintaining that position. But again, we're being ambitious as a partnership in saying we will reduce it to a figure and we will sustain that. I think to get beyond that, we need to completely transform the kind of discharge arrangements we have in place in our system. Again, like others working in the virtual ward, we start seeing steady increase in the numbers, but a lot more to do. But yeah, I think the partnership's really starting to work more effectively together. So thank you all involved in that.
Emma, thank you. Any questions for Emma? That's great. Before we move on, can I just pick up something that came out of 3 or 4 things, which is digital? I think it would be helpful, Gavin, if at some point we had a conversation. It might just be an informal around what our thoughts are around digital. I mean, we all realise it's a real opportunity to do things differently, and we're worried about digital exclusion. I would have thought it's something we could just usefully have a discussion about. So maybe we could pick that up at a future. It might be an informal, Gavin, but we keep mentioning it en passant. Yeah. I'd quite like it to be a topic of conversation. Is that all right? Thank you for that. Thank you very much to the place directors. Okay, item 10 is the South Yorkshire Strategy and Planning Update. Will, you're back amongst us.
Thank you very much. Yeah, does it feel like I've been gone a long time?
Well, I haven't spoken to you at ages.
Thanks, okay. So if I could just pull up a few bits out. Okay, so this paper's trying to cover off 3 things, I guess. Yeah. It's starting with our integrated care strategy and just trying to bring us up to speed on where we are with that. And then I just wanted to make sure the board was up to speed where we are with developing our joint forward plan, and then I'll pick up on the operational planning work as well here. So I'm going to cover those 3 things. Okay. And just to remind, it seemed ages ago, doesn't it, since the integrated care strategy was first received in public on the 20th of December.
by our Integrated Care Partnership chaired by our Regional Mayor, Oliver Coppard, and was received very well. And then if you remember, it came here to our board in public as well on the 4th of January. And in the intervening period, we've had, because it was an engagement draft of the strategy that we set out, it's been around all of our organisations, and of course we've continued to build on the engagement approach and that question that we asked our public in terms of what matters to them. And we had a commitment to go a bit deeper as well, to work with our voluntary sector on that. So that's all been continuing. We had some really, really positive feedback. I want to just reflect the feedback a little bit, because I think it's really important, because all of our partners took the time to give feedback, which I think is it's quite important to reflect that, given where we are and all the conversations we have around how busy we are, that partners have done that. I think it's really helped us sort of focus in. So some of the things that really came back in that feedback was how we place greater emphasis on quality and access within the strategy. So remembering that the public really fed that back quite clearly, that it was important to them, but also certainly some of our key stakeholders fed that back as well, and that will be reflected in the revised, or I should say the finalised strategy that will go to the Integrated Care Partnership later on this month. Another area that came out quite strongly, and it's actually just helpful to be reminded of the update that Mark and Wendy gave around arts and culture and the importance of that with wellbeing. And I think that obviously our arts and culture community fed back on the strategy as well. So that's featured within the update. We will have a finalised strategy going to the Integrated Care Partnership on the 24th of March. So that's when the next meeting is. I think suffice to say, whilst there's been some additional inputs and changes to the strategy, the essence of it, which I took this board through in January in terms of what was reflected on the plan on the page, in terms of those overarching goals and also those bold ambitions and commitments, they are unchanged by the feedback. In fact, I think there was a very strong reflection that they are about right in terms of what an integrated care strategy in its initial form should reflect for South Yorkshire. And I think it was valued, the fact that we recognise the importance of building on what we've already got and not trying to do everything at once within that strategy. So having some very clear ambitions of what we want to do were strongly received. So the best start in life for children, we've started our board today, haven't we, in that space, obviously is one of our key goals. The living healthy for longer and that focus on improved wellbeing and also on those with the greatest need was well received. That safe, strong and vibrant communities as well in terms of that third ambition, of course the focus on people and the skills, and then those bold ambitions from some real focus on children, young people, prevention, inclusive economies and focus on our workforce. All of those remain the same. So I think it's suffice to say is that the essence of the document that this board saw is the essence of the finalised version that will go to be supported. In terms of launching of the strategy, the plan at the moment, and it's still work in progress, but the week of the 20th will be the launch week, so that's when the main focus around launching the strategy will take place. And I think there is some real ambition, particularly of partners and certainly of the Mayor, to try and really connect the launch with those bold commitments. So, I mean, and there really is an ambition to have a real focus in that week around children and people as well, but recognising that we've got 4 ambitions, so trying to get a really good mix within that. Andy may want to just come in and just give a bit of a sense of some of the detail around that, but as I say, it's still being worked through. I think the ask of us all, so all stakeholders, is to really engage with the launch and support the launch of the strategy, but also just get it out there in terms of helping with the sharing of that and actually articulating the importance of it. But just recognising that we've always said it's point in time. We will continue to build on it. And in terms of those 4 bold ambitions, there was an ask at the last Integrated Care Partnership to develop an outline plan in terms of how we will start to build on that in terms of developing a clearer plan to be able to take some really clear next steps. So I'll update more on that here at the next meeting. There is going to be a toolkit developed to really help all stakeholders and individuals to really make the most out of the launch and really make the most out of sharing of the strategy. It'll be really quite intuitive in terms of the toolkit to engage with folks and communities and stakeholders wherever they are. So Andy will just add a little bit more to that, but I think we're trying to really make the take the opportunity to support the strategy to be shared, but really connect well with where people and communities are. I think that's all I wanted to say on the integrated care strategy piece. And I just if Andy wants to say any more around the launch, then I'll carry on with the joint board.
Yeah, thanks. Andy.
Yeah, thank you. Well, so I mean, in essence, I think there's probably 2 elements around the launch of the strategy. Clearly, the communication of the strategy itself and make it available in as many formats as possible and make it really accessible to our communities. But the second element, which Will touched upon, is actually embedding parts of it into the consciousness and getting people talking about parts of the strategy. So we'll be looking at having a discussion with our communities about what we want the future of South Yorkshire to look like, and getting all of our partners and all of our communities and all of our groups just to have that conversation of, for our children and young people, what does the future of South Yorkshire look like, and kind of what do we need to do about it as we move forward and tie that back into the strategy. So, and that's where the creative toolkit that Will touched upon is kind of like the guide to clubs and community groups and organisations such as the Food Trust and everybody who's involved in the strategy, just to have that conversation and kind of feedback to us and share what it was that they discussed about the future of South Yorkshire.
Thanks. I mean, I think the challenge for launching the strategy for me, and we had this conversation with Oliver 10 days ago, I might guess, is, is making this something more than just another bloody strategy. No, well, you know what I mean by that. Sorry, pardon my language. And actually make it real and make it something that we're committed to and makes a difference. Because the world's littered with wonderful strategies, with great intent that nobody would argue with a word of, let me be clear, and very few people have done anything with. And the challenge for us is strike the tone right at the launch. It isn't just another beep beep strategy, and then actually to use it to guide us over the next few years. And that's not just us, it's our local authority partners, it's the voluntary sector, it's the mayoralty. And I think that's the bit that, when we launch this, that's the question Oliver will be asked, I'll be asked, you'll be asked. What's different about this one? And I think that's the one we really need to be utterly conscious of, rather more than, and I mean, I remember when I arrived at South Yorkshire for interview, I said, you've got a great strategy, I haven't a clue what you've done with it. And the one we've written is slightly better, but it's still words that we would all agree with. That's the challenge. I think we should just keep that in our mind all the time. Rosemary.
Can I just ask about this toolkit and the kind of wider engagement, please? So I'm just thinking about timescales. It's the 1st of March today. Obviously, is that out there already? If we're asking community groups and organisations and stuff to engage with it in 3 weeks' time, is it out there already, Andy, or is it?
No, so we'll be sending out a briefing note at the start of next week to say it's coming, and then we'll be. The thing about the toolkit is it'll have quite a number of resources in it, which we need to go away and create now that the strategy's been finalised, so that whoever gets hold of the toolkit, whether it's an organiser or somebody who's part of a group, can download a big pack of resources that they'll be able to use. So we're going to give people a heads up that it's coming, and then so that they can start to prepare, and then the toolkit should arrive shortly after that. But I absolutely accept that it will be quite close. And the reason for that is the timing of the launch is very sort of prescribed between, we've got industrial action in large parts of March, but we've also got the pre-election period coming up in April. So the period of launch has kind of been chosen for us.
am I right in thinking then that the launch is kind of the conversations?
Yes.
Not that all the conversations have got to happen the week of the 20th of March.
In many respects, I think it's a starting point of a conversation, not the finishing point of it.
Yeah.
Leslie?
So, yeah, that's right. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, well, do you want to move on to the?
Can I just mention one?
Oh, sorry, Moira, I apologise.
Just quickly on the toolkit, I think it'd be really helpful at one of our development sessions if somebody actually takes us through it a bit so we understand what's in it.
A really good idea.
I just want to make one point about, I mean, it's your sort of challenge really about, kind of the sort of so what, and I think one of the things that is different about the strategy is it's specific in terms of its ambitions, and they're measurable and they can be tracked. And I think one of the things that would be really good to do here would be to describe that. And it's quite a bit of detail, but it just gives you a sense of substance, because you can see actually it's quite clear what we're trying to achieve. It's ambitious, but it's also quite clear how we'll be able to see whether we're making progress or not. So it'd be good to have that here.
Thanks for mentioning that, Gavin, because I think I did mention it when we had the fuller update in January, but there will be a dashboard that sits behind it, so that ability to be able to track back to the stuff that we want to do that is specific, to be able to sort of measure success is part of that. So I think we should probably go through that in some more detail here at this board. This thing I also just wanted to reference here, she said it as well, is that I'm mindful that I give an update here, but actually it's an all partners thing. And whilst I'm updating, for example, on the development, actually, to be fair, that the idea of the toolkit has come from other partners, which is fantastic. So I think what we're going to get is, and so what will be different? I mean, that is different. Actually, the fact that the inputs to this strategy are quite different to the ones that certainly I've been involved in or led previously. So I'm hoping that will lead to different outputs. But it's just, I just have to constantly remind myself this is not an NHS thing, and it's not an ICB thing. It's the whole system thing. I just happen to be giving the update. Just so moving on to not having strategies then that just sit on a shelf. So our joint forward plan. So I think the important bit around this is not to create another strategy. So we have received guidance on developing our joint forward plan. It's meant to be a joint forward plan between us and NHS Foundation Trusts. That's how it's written, but actually it's really, I think the way that we're trying to see that is a delivery plan for the systems. And I guess moving on from taking our integrated care strategy and all of the stuff that we're doing, what does a delivery plan look like for South Yorkshire, with the essence of the NHS working well together, but for the NHS working well together with others, whether that's in place or across South Yorkshire. And therefore, that is the premise by which we're trying to do that. I guess the update today, just to give confidence that we have started that. I'm just mindful that there is lots going on, still finalising the integrated care strategy, and we do have operational guidance which tells us some of the things that we should be doing as well. So if you think about the joint forward plans, trying to capture a forward view delivery plan of the things that we think are important for us to do in South Yorkshire, wherever they are, reflecting the integrated care strategy, but also the things that the NHS has been asked to deliver on, stuff in that operational plan, and particular focus around access and quality. The essence of our joint forward plan is going to try and capture that. Our colleague Mariana Hargreaves has done a fantastic job in pulling together a coordination group from across our system, pulling in all of the right folks to do that. So in terms of pulling in all a leadership community who see planning as their job, I think we've done a great job in pulling that together, as well as all of the expertise as well that we have in our system, and that includes as well within that. In terms of engagement, because I'm really mindful of the engagement and involvement aspect. This is always difficult, isn't it? Particularly when you've got tight time scales. I think we're obviously building on what we've done for the integrated care strategy. It's not an end point. We've continued to do that. But I think the thing that's different this time as well is also thinking about
as we're developing that plan and working with collaboratives and alliances and others, thinking about the networks of involvement and engagement they've got, we're very much trying to work with that as well. I think that gives us a much richer picture, particularly as one of the deeper dives we want to do in terms of engagement and involvement is on some of the access and the quality bits. And therefore working with provision and where provision are working well together should really help us with that. We're at a point where we've actually developed our own templates supported with this. I have to say that out loud because I think we're always inundated with templates. But the only reason why I mention that is because I'm really keen to hold to the principle that this is a delivery plan, it's not another strategy, because otherwise we'll have two competing strategies in the same space. And therefore developing a framework for us to be able to capture what we think is important to us in a way that makes sense and a way that helps us really focus on that year one of that delivery plan, which is our operational plan, isn't it? Let's face it. Plus the things that are important to us, whether we're doing them in each of our places or doing them in collaborative. We need to capture that quite succinctly. So essentially it's capturing all of the things that we think are priorities for us. So all of that work's happened and we'll get the first cut of that on the 3rd of March. So we'll have a view of that in our system. And what we've got to then do very quickly is translate that into some draft of a delivery plan, because you'll have noticed in the paper at the same time as being able to finalise our operational plan. We've also got to have a first cut of what our joint forward plan looks like. So there's some quick steps happening to try and get to that place, and I'm sure that we'll do that, but there'll be some iteration between the end of March and of course the end of June timeframe, and of course we'll want to be really clear about of those bits of the plan, where do we need to further engage, particularly with our community on that. So that's trying to give you a bit of an update on the joint forward plan and where we'll get to on that. I think there's something at the end of this piece, which is because we meet every 2 months and therefore just trying to give the board a sense of how does the board sort of, get sight and shape that apart from this update here. So much want to on that at the end. And then finally on our operational planning, which is always a work in progress, because it's about not only the underpinning priorities, and largely they are set for us. So there's 31 operational priorities that we'll publish, and they very much cover access to physical and mental health, don't they, as well as health inequalities. And then aside of that, the joint things that we want to do as a system that fit outside that, because that's not really everything we do. It's the underpinning activity and finance that fit with that. And even in the update, when I've just given a few headlines of some of the areas that are still work in progress for us, I'm sure that they'll be work in progress over the course of the weeks and months. But I just wanted to make sure that the board were aware that we are on with that. Progress is being made on all aspects. I've captured a few headlines. Naturally, you're hearing some of the challenges that we've got with delivering on improvements in waiting times and around electives. Naturally, that's going to be impeded by pressures and industrial action. So those are some of the risks that are inherent, certainly in our plans currently. I think on the operational planning, I think Lee and Christine may want to say a little bit something around.
Can I, before we move on to the operational planning, which is we do want to have a discussion on, and I know it's moving and it will move again, so the board just need to understand this is work in progress. We've talked about launching the integrated care strategy 20th March.
20th
in the week commencing 20th March.
Yeah.
The 5, can I just make sure I'm clear in my mind? The board might all be, I'm not. The 5-year forward plan, what our timeline for that is, when the board will see that again. And then we'll come back to the operational plan, which I realise is going to be very movable over the next few weeks.
So final plan, joint forward plan, is the 30th of June. That's the final plan. We've got a staging post, which is the end of this month, same timeline as the operational plan for a first cut of that.
Okay. So just in terms of the board, talk about the operational plans, I think we might need to set something up that's out with our normal board meeting, and it's going to move. And no offence, Lee, this will move after the 30th of March, in my experience. But it says to me that in our April informal, we can have a real discussion about our 5-year forward plan. We need to make sure we have a way of briefing the board before the end of March on where we are on the operational plan. I will not say it's our final plan for the meeting, but I think I'd like to set up a briefing so we can think about things. That's reasonable. Does that make sense to the board? Do you want to pick up operational plan and where we are, Lynn? I recognise this is very much work in progress, and then can we think about next discussion?
Absolutely, yes. So just to brief it, there's a sensible piece of work that's going on in the overall integrated care partnership space, which will have some key performance indicators, which will be very, very sensible, population centred, and we'll launch that in March. In addition to that, we've got a staging post for the joint forward plan, which is an NHS-centric thing, which will describe what we're doing over 5 years. First staging post for that is the 31st of March, but we'll complete that on the 30th of June. The operational planning thing, which is a desperately NHS-centric activity, in my opinion, but it needs to be broader, is the initial staging post for that is we've submitted something on Thursday at midday as a set of NHS folk, which was our initial, what do we think is going to happen with workforce, what do we think is going to happen with activity, and what do we think is going to happen with money? And currently as it's conceived, and we'll have a bet, Piers, as to whether or not it extends beyond the end of March. I don't know. At the end of March, we'll submit our final operational plan, which will say this is how we're going to deliver money, activity, and workforce through next year. And when I say activity, the activity submission is very general and acute focused in that activity submission. So when I say the shorthand is what you're going to do with elective recovery. So that's a bit of a criminal shorthand, but largely it's describing what's going on with activity around. So to join these things together is quite hard. So we're having a conversation about place-based improvement, which is multi-agency in nature, which is quite conceivably the solution to general and acute bed pressures, which will probably take a longer conversation with stakeholders than the end of March to do it really well. But we've got a guillotine at the end of March to say, this is what we think next year is looking like for us in South Yorkshire in terms of activity, workforce and planning. So there's self-evidently attention there. You've got this NHS-centric operational planning process, which is reliant on these more complex and sustainable conversations with stakeholders that's going on at place. So I want to make that point. Piers, I can torture the board with a sort of finance update if you'd like me to, or do you just want me to give some headlines?
I think it'd be worth giving some headlines. Okay. And secondly, then, it's worth us just agreeing, given the end of March timescale, and we don't have an informal board till early April. This might be wrong. I think we need to find a way of briefing everybody. I'll call it in the last week of March. We always said we'd do something, so can we just? It'd be worth finishing on that conversation because this is going to move a lot. Suggestion. Yeah. Okay, that's helpful. Go. Thank you.
Okay, I'll use one slide for the update. I'll not torture you with the whole deck, but this is where we've got to on the money. The preamble to this is it's blooming complicated. This is a first cut. We are trying to manage the complexity of quite how hypothecated the funding is. We're doing an assessment of what's going on with inflation around here and a range of other things. So this is, I'll just do the summary slide only. Yes. So we've got a draft plan system deficit as of Thursday of last week, having done all this triangulation and complexity between provision and commissioning of 227 million. So that is an imbalance. So that is the wrong number, should be a zero to the tune of 227 million. So if we just issue forth the plan that we've currently got, we're short of money to the tune of 227 million. 93 million of that sits within the ICB as a statutory organisation, circa 170 million of it sits out with us in provision. Important to note relativity in this. So we have a system deficit for South Yorkshire which places us in the national top 10. We're in the top 10 of the hip parade of the 42 ICBs. This isn't going to get musical acclaim. This is going to get enhanced scrutiny. It's not going to result in a Brits party. So we are in that top 10, at number 10, incidentally. And And that's having done a sort of central adjustment to go, well, we think we could do it slightly better than this, which we were behoved to do slightly by NHS England colleagues. So even with that, we've got a system deficit of 7.4%. Most of the systems are in a range of 5.6 to sort of 7. Efficiency at the moment stands at 86.8 million. Very little efficiency currently in the ICB space. Reference the conversation about how are we really going to be able to quantify those place improvement plans around left shift, earlier intervention, different outreach, different loyalty models, how we play that into the planning process. And so we've got a situation where we've got a sort of higher deficit and lower efficiency currently in the plan than other systems. So we'll have to do some work around that. I've got a sort of week by week schedule that I'm about to share with directors of finance, then chief executives in the system about this is the work I think we need to do to get as good a plan as we can. Where I think we need to get to is we need to be able to describe, can we really say something incredibly sensible about the bridge from this year into next year if we have a residual deficit? And do we have a level of efficiency, both technical efficiency within provision and allocative efficiency in the 4 place plans that's defensible at the end of March? So we're making sense of this. There is still some allocations due. I don't yet know what funding we're going to get from maternity services, say. So on the provision side, I've got a cost pressure in maternity that might have a funding source. So I still don't know all the money that's going to arrive in the system. So this is still sort of draft work in progress. And there's going to be some very intensive work between now and the 31st of March. The reason why I'm prepared to have a sportsman bet on your peers about will it be the final plan at the end of March or not is I think the NHS was so big by having the perennial planning process that ran into April, May and June. First quarter of the year, we were still planning. I mean, we were submitting a monthly plan for months that are already gone at the end of June. I think there'll be a real national ambition to try and get something as full and final and as defensible as the end of March. And then there'll be a process beyond that, I think, if we're not looking like we're stretching enough on elective recovery, or it just look like we're going to have something sustainable in national finance. I think that might be covered in a different way, but I think there'll be an enormous national ambition to get to the end of March with as full and as final plan submission as is possible. So they're the headlines for now. Ink's still very wet on it. Still loads of triangulation work to do, but Gavin and I are blessed with an interaction with both Richard Barker and Tim Savage on Friday to go, well, where are you at and where do you think you're going to get to with this, which I think is going to have particularly a sort of elective recovery and sort of financial focus.
Because if you look at that, and I was the centre, very obvious questions I'm going to ask you, which is your efficiencies are lower than most other places and your deficits higher. What would it take to get that down to the pack? And the pack will, at the moment, because I had a conversation with chairs as well, the pack are all looking like there's going to be a huge difficulty presenting a balanced budget, but it won't be to those scale. And that's why I think it's going on longer. However you describe it, we will be having conversations in April about, right, how do we get that last bit of this down? These are my words. I can just smell it.
What I'm trying to isolate here is if we've got a problem around the underlying position, we have used a lot of non-recurrent solutions to deliver in year. That is going to pop out to next year. If we've got a core problem around excess inflation different to the national assumption, we need to surface those issues so that we can say the reason why we're struggling is for these finite range of issues, and then it will be then into a conversation that says all that hypothecated funding into all those areas, do we really think we're going to spend it, or is there going to be non-recurrent slippage? So there might be some non-recurrent solution there. So I think it's just how stepwise we're going to be able to tell the story. If we've got a core financial problem that's going to might invalidate national assumptions about can we honour the commitment we've made on elective recovery, because there's going to be a trade-off between operating and financial performance. We need to be able to say that towards the end game about what it would take to get to a balanced plan is perhaps not delivering all the national assumptions about where that hypothecated funding goes. Well, that's the interim update, and I took longer than I'd hoped to, and sorry.
Really helpful update. Kevin.
Again, I'm too experienced to know this is the final answer. Hopefully it goes in the right direction. And so our thoughts are with you on this occasion. I think Lee sort of answered the question before I asked it, in terms of if I was a member of the public now, I think Lee might tell us later it's looking fairly positive for our end of year financial position, subject to some risks. So I'm thinking as a member of the public, well, how have we gone from naught to one of the worst deficits in the country overnight? And I guess the answer is the narrative that sits behind it, which I know you're going to go away and do. That bridging narrative is really quite important to us, because that will give us a key to some of the potential responses to it as well. And I think that's critical for when we do get together in March to understand what that bridging position is.
No, I think that's right.
And I'm just a little bit nervous about efficiency. It's not a technical question, but the efficiency is lower than the average. Still a flipping big number in terms of a stress system that's struggling to recruit the right workforce and has capacity shortfalls anyway. So let's not lose the fact that whilst we're below average, still a big flipping number. What I don't know though, does that include anything brought forward that we haven't delivered currently from the current financial? We've done a bit of sticking plaster work on efficiency this year. So is it really a bigger number?
No, that's the fresh stuff starting next year. That's the
so
fresh
anything
stuff
we've got to
starting
catch up from this year, we've got to add to that.
That's embedded in the 227.
Okay.
That's embedded in
That's
the
helpful.
227.
That's helpful.
I agree. I'd say 2 or 3 things. Really helpful. We'll set up something in end of March. The only worry I have, and I had this conversation with chairs, and Gavin and I are speaking to chairs tomorrow afternoon on this, very much giving them the same message, is every year, no offence, Lee, directors of finance claim my ability to balance was done by non-recurring mechanisms this year. But we do hit non-recurring savings every year. We can't assume nil, and that should make a difference. And doesn't mean it's all the answer. But you're right, the question we will be asked centrally is, in crude terms, you were in balance at the end of the year and you're now in the top 10 deficits. Discuss, Piers. I can hear the Secretary of State ringing me. Actually, it's probably one I'll have personally if it's that scale, by the way. I know you're all feeling for me at the moment, but, and I do think when we have the discussion at the end of March, that movement to end of year to where we are now is we all need to understand, because we're going to come under scrutiny.
I mean, what I would say about that number is there's an inevitability about that number being large about how we've conducted ourselves in terms of the NHS planning process. If the money's all arrived in, highly hypothecated into particular areas, there's currently a range of assumptions that that's what we're going to spend the money on. When we get into the workforce triangulation bit about, are we physically going to find our share of £200 million worth of paramedics and ambulances to put on the road from the 1st of April? Well, unless something mystical happens, we might struggle with a bit of that. So at the moment, that number's probably inflated by that hypothecated funding and set aside for the precise things that we think we're going to spend it on. Whether or not we've got a workforce that can go behind that is another issue. So almost the way in which we've conducted ourselves, I would claim, and I'll be saying to Richard and Tim on Friday, is there's an inevitability that you've inflated that number because you've told us what this money should be spent on. Whether or not there's a workforce there to absolutely deliver it in that way, maybe not.
Okay, Richard, and then Gavin.
It's a question really about the initial allocations. It's my understanding of top 10, if you like, deficit positions is that 3 of them are South Yorkshire, West Yorkshire, and of course, which ties to some of the perceptions about the levels of deprivation and otherwise. Do we think there is something in that in terms of we've got 3 of the highest deficit positions nationally, or is this just about the other factors you're talking about?
I think it's other factors, Richard. I don't think you could lay a claim that the sort of convergence and what's going on with the overall national funding formula is driving something different for the North. Historically, it's always been the Midlands that's been in the clack, with other regions kind of following around. And there's a long and tortuous story about market forces factor, absolute deprivation indices, and what does that mean? I don't think this is that. I think this is, candidly, where we're currently pitched in terms of bank deficiency versus heroism. I think we're a bit more at the bank deficiency end in terms of what we've submitted to date, and other systems are under more pressure in year from the national team and regional teams. So I think to be brutally frank, because I think we've been absolved from a bit of that in South Yorkshire, I think we're a bit more at the Conservative end of efficiency. That there's always going to be a judgment in this about what do we assume for efficiency into next year, and just getting that judgment right between this is stuff we can absolutely bet our mortgage on versus heroism That's always a judgment call, and I think that'll be part of the conversation. I think with chairs.
I think that's absolutely right. And what we shouldn't want, as chair of the ICB, what I don't want to see, it's very easy to just increase the efficiency figure and you've got a balanced budget. I think some of the people who are in real financial difficulty, some of the ICBs in real financial difficulty in the current year simply did that. They had, you called it heroic efficiency targets. I would call wildly unrealistic efficiency targets. They present on paper a balanced budget. Everyone walks away, and we know in month 6, because it's like sure as eggs is eggs. In month 6, this manifests itself as, oh, I've got a deficit. Really? We all knew it was going to happen. So there is a balance to strike. Equally, we need to challenge ourselves and our providers on efficiency, because if we look very low on that, that is a place where we'll be challenged. I would argue this is normal stuff. Yeah. We're sharing where we are at a point in time. We'll be a month further on when we probably next brief you. I think we'll be having further briefings in April, and I'm happy to have a little back with you, Liz. You'll just decide it's not called the plan, it's just called post-plan discussion to try and win the bets. But trust me, we'll be having those discussions. Gavin, do you want to talk about how we pick this up next? Because the board needs to be
just a couple of points. I mean, just to echo that this is absolutely a work in progress. So this is kind of the kind of unadulterated position. We've asked people what they think, put it together. We've not done any kind of real sort of analysis of the relationship between different parts of the system, etc. So very much a work in progress. But I think it's good to just to share that.
Really helpful.
I think just to pick up Richard's point about deprivation, I mean, the levels of deprivation in South Yorkshire this year are probably not much different than they were last year. So I don't think you can use that as an argument to say, well, there's 237 million pounds worth of additional cost from one year to the next. So I think this bridge from one year to the next is critical. I think we absolutely need to be able to, with kind of forensic certainty, describe why the position has moved from where it has. The issue about efficiency, I mean, I agree. I mean, the NHS has never delivered anything. It's always in the sort of 3.5%, at best, maybe 4% if you work really hard. Anything beyond that, I think to be frank, is in the realms of kind of unrealism, really. So I think we do need to challenge ourselves around efficiency, but it needs to be realistic. That doesn't mean to say we need to have a plan by the end of March, which is that we know exactly where every cent of that efficiency is coming from, but we need to have a pretty good idea of where we're going to look and how we're going to do that work. I think it's fair to say that from the ICB, if you look at our efficiency ambition, it's lowest of the pack. So we've got some challenges for ourselves. I think it's fair to say as well, we are expecting some guidance around a running cost allowance challenge for the ICB. So I think we'll get some guidance on that probably in the next few days. So I think that will kind of contribute to that discussion around efficiency, but we ought to challenge ourselves. I think as ever, the timing is not perfect because the plan, as we've said, is going to be in at the end of March. Our next board meeting isn't until the week after. So we do need a mechanism. I think we've got a finance investment committee. I've not spoken to you, Kevin, about that on the 30th of March. Is that? Sorry, Moira. But I'm just wondering whether we might use that opportunity to, basically to have a final look at the submission, whether it's the final word or something that develops, but using that date of the 30th of March, and we might maybe kind of increase the invitation to give other colleagues the opportunity to be there.
I think that'd be helpful. That'd be helpful. I would like the board to at least be aware of the final submission that's going in and what it feels like, and I think that's probably the only date that's credible because at least we've got 2 of you around it. So let's.
Well, we'll certainly know what we're going to submit at the end of March on the 30th of March.
So can we put that date around as an invite to everybody? We could talk about whether it's Teams or face-to-face. We put that to everybody today, please.
Clearly, the operational plan is absolutely work in progress, but I think the report helpfully outlines some emerging risks, which will be probably different from the time of writing. 3 of them, no surprise really, given the scale of the challenge in the system. Couple of questions. One is, can I draw some comfort at this stage from the fact that that's a relatively short list of emerging pressures? So, for example, one of the challenges we've had all this year is around diagnostic treatment times. Now, we've heard at the board that we've had the Montague scheme being approved, we've had the glasswork scheme being approved. So can I just draw some comfort, for example, on that issue, that is part of the solution, because they're down track, they are, in terms of their impact. So is the fact that diagnostics is not an emerging risk a positive here?
I think it's important to take that list of emerging.
You might not be able to take such positive feelings, Kevin.
I
I think was what my director of strategy and planning was talking about there. Is that right?
And the second issue, which came up at the Doncaster committee, was IAPT really. Again, not necessarily now, but some understanding of whether that shortfall is demand-led or is it capacity-led, because it may be a combination of the two. And what I did, I was sold by a discussion on the Doncaster committee on Friday around, it's not just about IAP services. So if there are patients and people in the system who are not getting the support they require from IAPT, what alternatives can we look at if that's going to be a capacity? So I just wonder if on this, I know that we can take a broader issue in terms of the impact on people.
Christine.
Do you want me to update on them?
I give you worth, because clearly one of the key risks here, or the key issues, is workforce. And if you look at the way Lee described the hypothecated funding, that looks to me like the thing is out of balance. Do you want to pick up some of that?
So, I mean, the workforce has yet to be triangulated. There was an issue with the national collection tool, which should have enabled an earlier triangulation at the beginning of last week, but that didn't happen. Had to part the spreadsheet. So the work on analysing the workforce elements has taken longer, and the triangulation still needs to happen. But where we are, again, with workforce, it is work in progress, just as Lee's just described. For the workforce element, it does span beyond the acute NHS sector. It does go into primary care. There's a number of there and it's covered mental health. There's a 5-year plan with until 12 months over the first year, and then some position for the following 4 years. So that's the situation that we're in. We get an aggregate position from all of the individual NHS trusts in South Yorkshire, in that respect, some information from primary care. And then we pull all that together and see what it says. At the moment, it is saying that we are over-established, but then there are some challenges around the vacancy data. We are showing that we need growth across all sectors in the acute. But we do have an underlying vacancy factor in all of those areas. So whether we can make that growth, given the fact that we're starting from quite a significant negative position, is probably a challenge. And then some of the agency and bank information, which we know we have a challenge over, we've been managing over the past year. And there seems to be a huge drop off at the end of March 24, which at the moment is unclear from the plan about how that's actually achieved. So this is the emerging information that's coming out of the plan. As you can see, our workforce planning lead is meeting with all colleagues in the trust, just trying to understand where the gaps are, where the challenges are. So I expect that position to develop over the next days and weeks, so we can then start to triangulate that with Lee's information, and we'll get a better picture on the emerging risk.
Okay. That's helpful. The idea of this conversation was simply to say to the board, this is work in progress. This is what it feels like, because we're in no better position than that. We're going to come together on the 30th. We'll put the note out. Is that a morning or afternoon? It'd be just helpful for people to know now. Afternoon. So the afternoon of the 30th, we will arrange a meeting for the whole of the board. It might well be by Teams, to brief where we are on the operational plan. That's the kind of the aim of that. Is that all right? Because I don't think we can do much more at this stage.
We came with this, and I'm a little bit nervous about where we're not in terms of our understanding of the workforce. I mean, we'll focus on a number of things at that session, but I think given that workforce is...
That's got to be a key issue.
We need a bit more confidence about where we are, what our starting positions, and therefore what our plans are.
I agree. And I think that one of the things, last year when we were having financial difficulty, I remember talking to chairs, my normal meeting, and asking them to look at an issue that we felt was wrong, which is they were making large-scale assumptions of workforce increases at the same time as not dropping their agency spend. I thought both couldn't be true. Actually, the truth is the workforce increases were wildly optimistic. The agency spend was going to have to stay, in my judgment. But I asked people to go and look at because I thought we were double counting. I'm not saying that is going on. That's going to be a real challenge for us. But you're right, unless we get some sense of whether the workforce numbers make any sense, then I don't think we can look at the money. It's still 75% of our spend. I propose that we finish there on that discussion. We'll come together on the afternoon of the 30th in some way to brief you on where we are. I think we'll have another discussion in early April, by the way, but is that okay? Really helpful conversation. Thank you. Does that move us on to the IPR, the Integrated Performance Report?
Thanks, Chair. So, I mean, the first thing I would say is, I mean, it's an evolving report. And I think every time we look at this, I think it's better than the last time. So again, just looking to Kieran and your BI team, and obviously Mel and the locality team as well. I think there's some terrific work going on here, and I think it's becoming more accessible. It's becoming easier to read. So I mean, just wanted to make that observation. As I said, there's a lot in here. So I think what I might just do is just give one or two colleagues just an opportunity to maybe just draw attention to some highlights. So I'll ask Mel in terms of kind of access and the national standards, David maybe on population health, David and Kathy on safety and quality, and then Lee, although we've just touched on it, is the kind of in-year financial position. Where do we think we're gonna land? So Mel, is there anything you want to draw out from a kind of national access perspective?
I think just sort of trying to link it back to planning as well. At the end of the performance report, helped coding the regional metrics and where they were in terms of primary care. If you look at primary care as an example, we continue to track the England per head population figures and continue to have really high levels of face-to-face. The planning asks for those to increase over the next year. So and the trajectory of meet that, so that's great. Ambulance handovers, this has been a long-standing pressure right across South Yorkshire, and you can see from the performance report that actually the 15 and 30 minute handover times have improved significantly, but there are also been more conveyances in January as well, and we continue to work on that, but with massive thanks to the trusts for the work that they've put into that. It has made a huge difference, I think. The next one's around the 4-hour waiting needing. Again, this is the standard that's being brought into 23-24, which is 76%. One of our sites, Rotherham, has been a pilot site, so hasn't been working to that standard. So that's something that they will bring in over the next year. And as you can see, it sort of tracks pretty much around the same levels for all of our places within the Children's Hospital. Those that are in department waiting for a bed, so the 12-hour decisions on there. For those that are outliers, there are bits of work going on to sort of try and bring that into line and try and understand it. So the improvement team are working with Doncaster at the moment, but just to say we are significantly less as an ICB than other ICB areas as a total, I'd say. So it's just worth pointing out some context on that. The narrative on that also talks about the border surveillance framework, which is the winter, and progress that we're making on that. It's the Alliance, and there are some significant progress on that. Public health, measurement, everything that, and the personal health budgets that need to be brought in over the next year, like in that as well, and also the discharging records on there as well. Something that we're doing within the system control centre, so we meet daily at 10 o'clock just to get a position statement. We are actually including the position statement of each of the pathways within that, so we know where everybody is and we can track that just during the week of the progress that's been made. Moving on to the elective care, as everybody's already alluded to, there are challenges on this, and you can see by the graphs on there that we have got increasing figures up to sort of over October and November. There are lots of measures in place to get these where you would like them to be by the end of March, but then, as everybody's talked about, there's lots of pressures that gives some issues around that. Diagnostics, I think, Kevin, you talked about this a little bit, didn't you? I think that gives an overall picture, and there's some nuances within all the different diagnostic measures within that. And again, that's a piece of work that's ongoing at the moment with the acute bed to see where we can get with that as soon as possible. And I think that was all I wanted to take out of that. And I'll move on to somebody else.
So if I pick up next, so just before I go into pop health management, I think the board asked me last time about of all them metrics that the BAP had, and I think it was 50 at that stage, and we've had another 15, I think, added to that. As what were the 3 areas of greatest impact? Well, I think they're developing the alternatives to emergency department attendance, that rigorous focus on hospital discharge, and then finally, I think I highlighted previously that real-time data in the system control centres. That was just a matter arising just from last meeting. What you'll see on page 77 of the board is that actually the new parameters that have been added are like a scorecard, and that kind of links in with Will's bit about how we're going to measure the integrated care partnership and what we've committed to do. So there are 4 headings, and those mirror the 4 shared outcomes that we have in our integrated care partnership board. So what the business intelligence team is looking at some of those measurable, identifiable things that we, I guess, traditionally then would have measured them for health and wellbeing. But also we've compiled them to give a bit of a comparison to where are we in South Yorkshire as a totality, but what the variation is across the 4 places. So I think hopefully you'll see that develops over time. It's a bit of a baseline, if I'm honest, Piers, because actually what you'll notice is there's a lot to go at. So some of these things won't necessarily change from board to board, but over a period of time, we're hoping that we can focus our attention into really honing down in those communities, so we can start to see some of this impact, because there is a huge variation across. Linking in then the first section of that is the best start in life. We've had a presentation today about young people. It's been well documented. The first 1,001 days really predict the whole of your life. So I think that recognising what's in the LTP strategy, what we're going to measure about how that might impact upon how we can change people's future lives. The others are self-explanatory with regards to the enabling people to live longer, improve physical, mental well-being, and then this one needs a bit more developing, and that's supporting people to live safe, strong, vibrant communities. Because how can we measure that? So Gavin, that was my just a bit of an oversight for today, and I think that will develop over time. But I'm hoping that the board will see that as a helpful metric to include, because actually this is the thing that's very different from the NHS metrics that we're being asked to do. This is the thing I think we all got in the game for.
Fantastic, thanks, Dan. I think it's a really important point about how do you maintain that balance between the kind of the immediate and the longer term strategic aims. So I think really important to see that. I mean, Kathy, just on quality and safety, is there anything you wanted to?
Yeah, I mean, Val and I were just having a bit of a conversation just before really around quality and safety metrics, because actually when you read through the RPR, a lot of those metrics we talk about are based on improving quality and safety for patients. If you think about all the urgent emergency care, mental health, learning disability, autism metrics that we look at. So I think there's a piece of work that possibly to do with Leslie and Quippi around. So what else needs to come through to board from a quality metrics perspective that's meaningful, and is gonna what we're looking at the moment isn't, and a lot of the data is 3 or 4 months out of date. We'll have the national maternity plan launched in the next couple of weeks. We'll be able to pull out what's key through that, and then what we'll link in that Richard and I did some work on what will the LMNS plan look like on the back of that. But I think doing some work with Quippi around really refining what quality indicators really need to come here, and what will be helpful and meaningful for the board, I think, is the next piece of work to do.
Leon, finance, and Christine, I might just ask you to pick up on workforce, if that's okay. But Lee,
with a fair wind and fine sail, despite anything extraordinary going on in months 11 and 12, we should get to a break-even position as a system. So we've been issued a further £10 million allocation from NHS England, conditional on getting to a system break-even position, which closes half of the circa £20 million gap. And I'm working with provider doc colleagues to just make sure we are straining every sinew at the year end to make sure we just about get over the line. But I think Kevin's right, just this, because we've done a lot of non-recurrent stuff in the year, just this explanation of, well, it was all right last year and it's still a yawning gap next year. Why is that? Is the next piece of work to be done? And I do think a bit akin to the quality and safety metrics, there's something about financial reporting and getting a bit more into well, what's going on in terms of programme spend around here by sector that we can start to refine through next year that really gets us into what's the comparative spend on primary care, what's the comparative spend, which gets us a bit more into a slightly more thematic space about what's going on around here. But from a narrower year-end perspective, touch wood, we should be all right. And we've got a series of DOF conversations to make sure we just about get over the line.
Thanks. Thanks, Steve. Christine, on workforce.
Yeah, I mean, there's just a couple of measures in on workforce, and this is still a work in progress. It's a new data feed for us. So this time we picked out sickness, absence, and vacancy rates. They do tell us a little bit around how we're attracting people, so you know what the sorts of scale of the challenges are around the workforce actually being in work to deliver. I mean, what you can see is that we do have quite a lot of variance in both of those figures. Both in terms of sickness rate and vacancy rates, we have a sort of gap from 1% up to 12%. You know, that's the variation that we have in vacancy rates reported. So it's interesting in that it does help us do some deep dives into the variation point and understand what's going on, because this could be about data capture really rather than reality. So we don't know. So those are the kind of things that as a workforce, hopefully working with colleagues in the trust to understand the rationale behind and see if we can support to try and reduce that. So those two measures.
Can't help but feel it's part of the report we do need to develop, because I think it's critical. It's all, I mean, we touched on it endlessly today, haven't we? It's all about people, it's all about our workforce, but you know, it's a start, but I think that's something to build on. Thanks, Christine. Chair, I'm happy to open it up.
Anything else on the force put, Kevin?
Just that really welcome the population health management stuff. But having said that, I do wonder if it's got its place in the IPR really, because you made the point, didn't you, David, that these are long-term challenges and we're not from meeting to meeting going to see significant variation on that. I mean, I still think it's helpful public information, but I just wonder if we start to put a slightly different focus on it around, well, yeah, there's greens, ambers, reds, but do we understand some of the reasons behind them? Because that would be a good discussion to have. Not all of them, because we don't want to create an industry, but there's a link here with our health inequalities work, obviously. But something that says we know this is an issue, it's green in Sheffield because it might be, because it's a good bit of practice that we can share elsewhere. But just something that we could draw out key issues around the longer term interventions.
Yeah, please, David.
I think it helps us focus on mine. So I think there's the benefit of that being here, and I suppose it's what the responsibility of the delivery group that I chair underneath this is, because I think that is the task that we're sort of going through. I think in reality, Sheffield is green because it's got a different demographic and it gets diluted down because of some more prosperous areas. That's not to say it doesn't have areas of deprivation to focus. So yeah, I'll have a think about that, and that's certainly what we are doing in our monthly SDG meeting.
I think it's something about that narrative in the public domain that we know Sheffield is green because just to understand some of that variation, not all of it, but some of it.
Lucy.
Just to make a comment about sort of nature of the report, and we have obviously described that it's become much easier to understand the metrics, they're much clearer. I think for me the next step in developing this report is a little bit linked to Kevin's point actually about just a little bit more narrative and a little bit more qualitative information to help you understand the figures. I talked last time about how the metrics on the GP reporting don't really tell the story of what people's experiences are related to GP, and probably no metrics will. Probably that's a really good example actually, as well as the population health stuff, actually where a little bit more narrative and a little bit more sort of experience information is going to help you get a richer understanding of what's going on. There's probably a few places in the report where that could happen. So I just wondered what the sort of intentions were around developing that aspect of insight.
I'm just going quickly on that one. So dead right, we need to add in the qualitative information, particularly patient insights and various other things. So there is a piece of work ongoing at the moment to review how we capture qualitative information across the system, how we can better use that, better analyse that, and better report on that sort of piece of work.
It's helpful, Lucy. Thanks, Kieran. I think the answer is this is a lot better. It feels a lot more rounded. I think we'll be constantly trying to make it, you know, more illuminating, I suppose is the way to describe it. Mark, and then Richard.
I do like the format of the report. I think it's really developing well. I'm probably going to be a bit greedy here, but if you look at the very front of the report, in terms of the system overview, They've all set, there are metrics for all sectors, so ambulance, primary care, acute, but not mental health.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering if it's possible to try and raise the profile.
Point well made, Mark. Point well made. I've got Richard Denmoira. Richard.
Yeah, it's a question, Chair, more than anything else, in that obviously, as we report on things, we report on placement report system, and this is a system report. This is about, and if you're a member of the public, you have to go through and disaggregate your system from the information. So I wondered whether it was thought that it would benefit from having a key metrics page, which was at a place level, where we can triangulate the information at a place level of how the place is doing. And I also wondered about that in respect of the earlier discussion about finance, because obviously what Lee touched on was the need for places to get together and begin to talk about finance, begin to talk about collaboration and collaborative opportunity to begin to bridge some of the gaps. And actually, if it's together and you can see the collaboration, you can see the collaborative opportunity, you can really focus on what I think Delta Social Care Act was doing, which was asking people to work together as systems, as places, to make sure the patients were at the centre of the journey and getting the best service that we can provide in those areas. So it's just a question on that really about presentation. Do we think a place angle to it would be useful?
Okay. So it's a live conversation, but Kieran,
Richard, yeah. So we recognise that the value of putting this information in different dimensions to give you that rich insight. So, you know, a holistic page that focuses on place and all the key metrics for place. That does make sense.
Thank you. Moira.
Yeah, I mean, I really like the sort of oversight, 2 or 3 slides at the beginning. Agree with the point about adding those sort of mental health issues in there as well, but also could there potentially be a bit more in terms of benchmarking how we fare both within the 4 places and across the national average in those early slides. The detail is as to how we fare is in as you go further on, but I think doing something like that a bit more upfront would help. I know this is discussed in huge detail quickly and we go with the route, so as a board you just get the opportunity to
I agree that
highlight.
we were talking about a trust and whether the board were aware where they were pitched nationally. And actually, I think if the board were aware of where they were pitched nationally, they might have acted differently. It's something we should be as well. So can we think about how we put that
in the report that Kieran and I are discussing? I mean, one of the things we've got really good visibility on is the performance in other parts of northeastern Yorkshire. So that would at least give you a sense of context, because you know it's hard to know whether actually is that performance relatively where does it sit, and I think you need to have that context. So we'll do that.
Thank you.
Lisa.
Mine is, well, my comment's just about sort of the primary care data and looking at the GP same day appointments. And I know that looking at the data, it appears that we're much lower than the sort of national average, but I think lots of GPs have kind of limited face-to-face contact to prevent burnout, but have found alternative ways for same day access, like online forms, text messaging services and things like that. So they are dealing with queries and things with patients on the day, but they're not actually face to face or not speaking to them on the phone. So I think until we record those contacts as well as same day access, we're not really going to have a true picture of the access in general practice. So I don't know whether we just need to ask GPs about this and record all of that so we get a true picture of access, or whether going back to GPs when we're working, we record all of those contacts as appointments and then that's in the data. But I just think this grossly underestimates the access in general practice at the moment. So it's just looking at that quality of data.
Absolutely.
Can I come back to this? You're absolutely right. And I think it's fair to say, Kieran, that there's some refinements done around the primary care data sets nationally anyway, because other things it doesn't reflect is our multitude of professionals and the access to those, and also doesn't reflect things like choice. Not everybody wants their appointment on the same day, quite frankly. So there's a lot more refinement to them. One area that we are looking at though is our live data within primary care, so our OPAL levels across practices, and we're getting there actually across not everywhere, but getting there really for primary care to describe you know, in the same level that a hospital could, you know, what is the current pressure, and that's important not only to demonstrate the demand in the system, but also to allow us to put actions in accordingly as a result of that. Now that's a lot harder, isn't it? But that really helps the work across primary care networks and other partners to say, actually, if we're in this situation, or even before we get there, this is what we're going to do. So much more work to be done on the primary care data sets.
Thank you. I just wanted to, I guess, share with you all the challenge of gathering timely and trusted data on MHLDA. It is proving, is it not, Mel, a bit of a tricky piece of work to have. If you just note on the pack there at 96, diagnosis rates for dementia. And the last data collection, September 22, so that's 5 months old. I don't believe that's helpful for us in our improvement journey. So we do really need to challenge what's stopping the timeliness of delivery of that data. And I know it's something that the provider colleagues are cited on as well. It's a real push, I think, in that space from my perspective. I don't think it's really good enough that we're talking about that data that's that old.
Yeah, we wouldn't accept it for A&E performance, would we? Which is kind of the test, isn't it? Yeah. Thank you, Wendy. Ben.
Yeah, just on the population health management stuff, I think it's really nice to see that it's now in the report and it's given us that focus. So want to keep it, but it does need development, I think. And I guess for me, there's some of that data, population health data, some of the population health management data in terms of what we're doing to change it. And it's almost, if we can get that narrative around, these are the population health issues, these are the things we're going to do, and then measure our doing so that we are more comparable.
That might be a good distinction. That's helpful. Okay. Really helpful. I think this is an awful lot better, but recognise it's work in progress. Given where we are on time, can I propose we take a 10-minute break, natural break? But it is 10 minutes, which means it's 11:50 when you come back. Not that I shout to you, it's 11:51. Thank you very much. I've already apologised to Jamie, so if she comes here for a meeting, then I delay her start. I really apologise. Okay, that moves us on to the next agenda item 12, which is population health and health inequality stroke.
Yes, I'll just very briefly introduce it. So I know the board's received well the previous reports I've shared in health management, health inequality. So today we've got a bit of a stroke focus. You'll remember that cardiovascular disease is a significant cause of death within South Yorkshire. So I'm not going to steal with Jamie's thunder. So you've seen her loitering in the back, and Jamie's got a few slides, and I'm hoping that we can bring them up, and we'll let you take us through. That's it.
Jamie.
Thank you everybody for having me today. I'm here to talk about stroke. I'm the Integrated Stroke Delivery Network Manager. Thank you. So yeah, I'm the South Yorkshire Integrated Stroke Delivery Network Manager. And I lead the programme for stroke across the region. So stroke is the fifth leading cause of death within South Yorkshire. And there are clear ambitions within the NHS long-term plan for stroke. And we know that it's one of the leading causes of disability within the country. The Integrated Stroke Delivery Network was launched in 2020, and it's the key vehicle for how we're delivering improvement and transformation work within South Yorkshire. We've made significant strides within stroke care within our region, starting with the hyperacute stroke unit transformation, which we've now embedded and we've proven has achieved some of the benefits it set out to achieve. We've begun to expand mechanical thrombectomy services, which is a life-saving, brain-saving treatment. We're focused on rehab, and we're raising awareness of stroke. We've brought investment into the region to support some of the improvement initiatives that we're taking forward. And we've introduced some innovative technologies throughout the pathway, which are really benefiting patients. We've embedded a panel of patients, stroke survivors and their families within the work we do. So they're working with us all the time, and we're working to develop our workforce. So we're taking a whole pathway approach from prevention through to living with stroke. But despite all of that, significant health inequality still exists. And we need to work together more effectively to prevent strokes and to reduce those inequalities and to make sure our services are as effective as they can be. And as a network, we really wanted to understand the inequalities more so that we could target the approach in our improvement work. And I've just put a picture of our panel up there because that was our Christmas celebration this year. So the panel are an integral part of our programme. They work with us to define our priorities. They've all got lived experience of stroke, and each one of them has experienced inequalities in relation to them having a stroke, in terms of their experience, in terms of their outcomes. And what we're trying to do with the panel is ensure that they're part of the journey with us. And we need to continue to improve outcomes for people like our members within there. And they really do represent our population. So I've just drawn out a few points from the report. It's quite an extensive report. We worked with the local knowledge and intelligence service to develop that and co-design it. And I believe they're replicating that in other regions now as well. And what I want to say before I get into some of this is that we're not in the data yet seeing the true impact of our HAZU transformation, because we've had to go back over a longer period due to COVID. So I think it'd be worth revisiting this data in a few years. So what we are seeing though is variation still, both in the prevalence of stroke and also in the risk factors of stroke. There's a strong social gradient, so we're seeing significantly higher admissions in our more deprived areas. And we're seeing in those deprived areas that the average age of admission is much younger than those least deprived areas, so 6 years younger that people are having their strokes. We're seeing more strokes in men, and we're seeing some underrepresentation in the data from Black, Asian and minority ethnic groups. And we're not sure why at this stage. It may be because people aren't presenting services in some of those populations. And we're also seeing variation at PCN level as well in terms of the risk factors, the prevalence, and also how that translates into stroke. So we've got some key PCNs that are of interest to us that we want to work with jointly. And in terms of outcomes and mortality, again, we're seeing variation still. So mortality significantly increases as deprivation increases. And again, the mean age of death for somebody who has a stroke is much younger in the most deprived population, so 5.9 years younger. We are still seeing some variations at a place level as well in terms of our outcomes. And so we think some targeted interventions in particular places would be of benefit. We've drilled down as far as we can into the data to actually pick out locality areas as well within each place, so that we can target things further and work with those local communities and primary care networks to try and prevent strokes and raise awareness in those areas. And just a couple of examples of that are, we're working with the Heart Health Alliance in Barnsley. So we've set up a stroke subgroup because we could see that our mortality figures for Barnsley were still high. So that bringing together partners across the system to actually take a targeted approach to raise awareness. We know that our Barnsley population still present late to services, which is having an impact on whether they can access life-saving, brain-saving treatment. And we've also got a schools project up and running at the moment with UCC in Sheffield, where we're working with young people. The insights that we've gathered are that young people are the key to getting some of these messages across to the population that we need to work with. So we still have a number of national drivers that are guiding the work that we do. We've got a number of key challenges still within our system. So we need to improve the detection and diagnosis and management of the risk factors and other long-term conditions that are linked or associated with stroke. We're still seeing some variation in quality, access and outcomes. And we've got lower thrombolysis, which is a clot busting drug, and we're still seeing low mechanical thrombectomy rates within our region. So that's a key area of focus for us as a network and with our partners. So we've got a few key areas of action. So we need to work smarter to try and prevent strokes and other cardiovascular disease. We need to raise awareness that stroke is a medical emergency. We want to continue refining our urgent diagnosis and treatment pathways and take advantage of some of the new technologies that are coming out and get our mechanical thrombectomy service up to 24/7. We want to refine and develop our rehabilitation services as well. We've got variation across place in terms of how they are offered, and we need to adopt a more needs-based approach. And we want to better connect our stroke survivors and their families into the communities. So we're just launching a project to embed social prescribing networks within the stroke pathway so that they can support people to live well for longer. And we're working with our workforce to develop it, to grow it, and to actually attract new people into the specialty. And underpinning all of that and threading its way throughout the whole programme is addressing stroke health inequalities across the whole pathway. So we need to continue to prioritise this area of work. And I'd like the board really to know the report and its findings, and also to reaffirm a commitment to keeping this high on the priority level. We want to continue working through the integrated stroke delivery network and keep addressing these areas for action. And that's all I've got to say. Thank you.
Jamie, that was great. Thank you very much.
Yes, but just have a couple of things.
Please, David.
So in the operational planning guide, there's a particular focus on hypertension and cholesterol. Now, those are determinants that affect heart disease and stroke. So I think what Jamie and I are sort of seeing is that we sort of combine, and we've recently appointed some clinical leads across the cardiovascular and stroke. We've had vacancies, but we've been successful in that. People can't have noticed the sort of national campaign FAST Act. You know, so that's on the telly at the moment. We've got a piece of work in Barnsley due to be announced and published. And the final thing I'll say is that we had a quarterly research innovation group, and the next one is actually going to be in Barnsley, and it's going to be focused on cardiovascular disease. So it's just how we're bringing this all together to do a bit of targeted bespoke work. And finally, on innovation, we're working with the ambulance service, and we've got a video pilot going on, so where they can assess people at the point of contact with the patient to help, you know, speed up that transfer of patients. So that's my final point to say. So,
thank you. Any questions? Gavin?
Yeah, I thought it's a fantastic presentation. I know you've done some incredible work within stroke. I mean, one of the things that really struck me though was this kind of really granular approach now, looking at those neighbourhoods where there's the greatest risk for whatever reason that might be driving that. And I do really like that kind of targeted approach. And I suppose what I'm wondering is cardiovascular stroke is one area, but there are others, respiratory. There's something about how do we develop a kind of a focused approach which is encompasses stroke but encompasses other things as well, that's focused on those particular neighbourhoods. So I think there's certainly something to build on from stroke, but I'm just wondering about how do we kind of increase the kind of the scope of that.
We met Jonathan Maron, the Director General for Health and Equalities, at the Mayoralty about 4 weeks ago, I think it was, and we were talking about health inequalities and all. But he said, actually, reach out. Stroke is one where if you get right next to the communities and go right next to GPs and get the prescribing right, actually you can make a real difference on a health inequality, probably more than most of these. That was quite interesting. That we said what was the one thing we could do, and he said that. So it was really interesting to see a guy nationally saying you could make a bigger difference on that than almost anything else you could do, which kind of, well, I was really interested in this because that was quite fascinating. Christine and then Anthony. Christine.
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. Thanks for the presentation. I thought it was really interesting and thought-provoking. Just building on what Gavin was saying about targeting, and people will have heard me say this many times, but 40% of our workforce live in most deprived areas in South Yorkshire. We've got direct contact with that workforce. So I'm just thinking about your engagement piece, your education piece, your health. So actually, it might be something that we could connect in with, perhaps do something, to target that, that particular.
Brilliant.
I've got Anthony then. Well,
yeah, my point was around the targeted work around communities. I think that's really at the heart of the work that we want to do with primary care networks and their partners. And, those can be tangible areas that partners can come together on a primary care network footing or a locality footing to do that kind of targeting work. I think we do need to become more sophisticated with our data and our analysis on that, but we've got the ability to do that at a place level, and all of our place plans include that locality kind of approach. So stroke, but also respiratory, etc. That's something we can really get into the detail.
So it's just on the Jonathan Maron and also connected with Christine Bix. One of the other bits of that conversation, we were talking about the world of work and actually what prevents people, getting back into the world of work when they've had, whether it, in this case, it would be a brain injury. And I think he was sort of exactly pointing out the direct correlation between the amount of people you can actually really get to and prevent that would have a long-term disability as a result of having a stroke. And just on Anthony's bit there, this is probably one of the areas where we have developed quite a really broad focus, but also quite detailed. So we could actually do something quite good and quite connected. Thank you. And I think it's amazing to see how this has developed from where it started, because actually this was one of the things that developed out of the networks, really, wasn't it, as a result of us making some changes around hyperacute stroke. So it's it's really helped us, I think, get, really quite granular in terms of, how we want to really sort of do something good. Did I hear you say, though, that we've lost some of the gains of actually making that change? Because one of the things that we gained as a result of making the changes to hyperacute stroke was some of those differentials that we see in some of our areas across that pathway. Now, we did gain the improvements that we were looking for, particularly around timeliness and thrombolysis. We lost some of that, did I hear you say?
I think we haven't lost the access element, so we're still getting more patients are accessing hyperacute stroke unit care. Some of the thrombolysis data has dropped a little bit during COVID. We sustained actually better than some other regions really. We managed to keep services going throughout, but we have lost a little bit on the thrombolysis front. And then the hyperacute work needs to be pushed forwards further, I think. That's the game changer in terms of outcomes.
Just another one, and I'm sorry to ask, and you might not know the answer, but it's just a question and we can pick it up outside, but just some of those other quality aspects of the hyperacute stroke service that we wanted to gain as a result of really making sure that all of our populations had timely access to specialist services. Have we maintained some of those?
So in terms of patient experience and outcomes, we've definitely maintained it. Some of the direct admission data has been a victim of COVID as well. So we're working with a couple of trusts on that at the moment to bring the direct admissions within 4 hours to the stroke unit up. So I think we've sustained, but I think there's more work that we could do to be even better in a few key areas. Diagnostically, we've definitely sustained that.
Really helpful. I've got David, then I've got Lisa.
Just to respond back to that. So one of the things is we're not sure yet if COVID itself has a direct impact on more strokes. And the second thing is we've raised this board before ambulance handovers, category 2 responses. These are people. This is why we drive that
really
handover.
Really good point. We use category 2 quite loosely sometimes, don't we? This is category 2, and we're measuring how quickly we get thrombolectomy. It's kind of critical stuff, isn't it? I've got Lisa, then I've got Kevin, then I've got Emma. Lisa.
For me, thank you so much for presenting that. I found that really useful. And you mentioned sort of lower presentation in Black, Asian and minority ethnic groups. I just wanted to highlight the importance of the BCSE when reaching out to those communities, because they can do so much work, and especially with prevention and education. So, people going into barbers shops and things like that, and pilots that have already run and have been really successful. So just remembering the voluntary sector.
Yeah, we've just actually linked with Shipshin in Sheffield.
Yes.
They're going to do a piece with us, making some social media resources in different languages, appealing to different people within the community. So,
perfect.
Kevin and then Emma.
Thanks, Jim. That's obviously really great work by you and many. You posed a question to us, didn't you, the board, of reaffirming our commitment. Well, yes, I think that's going to be the answer. But particularly the areas identified for action, you've listed under those 4 broad themes, a number of actions. And I wonder, Chair, if a way to do it would be for us as a board or one of its committees to revisit this with some progress against those key actions. But that will also include the issue that you raised, that Lisa focused on, about broader access to these services as well. And in particular, obviously, we'd love to hear what's gone well, but anything that you want the board to undo, because there will be some frustrations in this in terms of progress. I'd welcome that.
Okay, let's get. I agree. Let's get that picked up by one of the subcommittees as a follow through.
Yeah.
Emma and then Lucy.
Yeah, thanks very much. I guess that in terms of septic prevention, one of the risk factors around controlling hypertension, and again, it comes back to, and I'm looking through that. I can see something in my eyesight's not great, but actually, are we managing variation across prescribing secondary prevention for some of these things, and also what is the rehab? Because I know that when somebody's had a as soon as they get into proper rehab, that really does start to improve their chances of a normal life. So again, interested to see the variation across Sheffield, across the patch. How does Sheffield compare with others? It's really important. Where we're losing is that if we saved 100 strokes a year, the impact on place, not just the health, but actually work, families, carers, is absolutely huge. So again, in terms of our ICP work, I don't know whether that's something we could think about. Say, if we saved how many strokes a year, that will have a massive impact actually on the health of our population.
Okay. Really helpful, David. Thank you, Jamie. Thank you. Really great presentation. I said this is a critical. So someone else coming in. Richard, I'm sorry, Richard, I didn't see you.
Yeah, I was question because obviously the paper talks about the acute and mechanical complexity and about the short-term measure, which is trying to get a weekday service. But you wonder with the type of service that this is, and it also plays to Emma's point about rehab, is that what we were doing with the acute stroke review was trying to produce sense of excellence that we're actually using our acute strokes and producing world-class rehab. And I think we dealt with the acute, but I was never quite sure we dealt with the rehab aspects of it, which I think plays into it. And then the next bit was that if this is our short-term plan for mechanical thrombectomy, it looks to me like it'll be a sort of cardiac PCI where it becomes more of a routine service that trainees in this specialty will be training and will want to do. And actually, is the next step to look at whether we equalise those services between the stroke services and access across that? Because I don't think we have one centre like we have one PCI centre, but one massive population, and all those people moving to those services, creating ambulance journeys, carbon emissions, and all the other things. If we think that's the direction of travel, training, we have to start that doing now. Because from the workforce pressures that we're not building in a plan to get where we want. So, do you think we need the next level of planning around this service where we want to be in 5 years?
David.
So I could respond to that, Lee. That's not the direction I want to be going. I don't want to invite them to building big hospitals. I want to be getting people smoking down to 5%. I want to be controlling blood pressures. I want to be stopping people getting strokes in the first place. So that just happens to be a personal sort of thing. We're having to build more mechanical, units for this. We've failed in what we should be doing as an ICB. So
I'm not disagreeing there. It's just where they meet in the middle. Because the other thing I was going to say is that on the lung health checks work we did, that when we did the lung health check, students to ask lots of questions about lots of things.
Yeah.
And so to me, we build all of these key prevention things into each interaction. Every account might develop and produce some of the qualities. The lung health checks rolling out to Barnsley, aren't they, in general terms? That seems to me be another opportunity to ask the question.
Your hand up, Lucy, and then Lee. Sorry.
You spurred me to say something, I'm not sure, but I'd be really interested in where is our most innovative practice in South Yorkshire around the management of hypertension. What is going on around peer support, around stroke and heart attack survivors, bringing them together with people who are hypertensive, so they're looking at lifestyle and non-drug related management of hypertension. I think that'd be a really rich. If we're not careful, we will hugely medicalise this. I would be really interested in which communities are managing to bring together folk to go. It's a huge abstraction, isn't it? If you're hypertensive, you can't go, you just carry on and you're probably fine. Well, no. So I'd be really interested in where was our really innovative community-based practice about the management of hypertension, and that would start to unlock from this debate, I think.
I think it'd be really interesting. I mean, one of the things that struck me at the Health Inequalities event was, I think, I can't remember who did, it might have been Chris Bentley, put a slide up about acute admissions. And actually, as you'd expect, acute admissions were much higher, the further you went in terms of deprivation. But what was encouraging was the range. So I suspect, Lee, there'll be practices not only that are managing this really well, they're actually managing this in difficult circumstances and challenging communities. So I think identifying those and learning what the magic is there, I think is a really great suggestion.
So I've got Lucy and then I've got Wendy. Lucy was before you, Wendy. Before you look at me, I saw that look on your face.
It was just to go back briefly to the question of underrepresentation for some groups, and I might be missing something in the data here, but from what you were quite honest about, we don't completely know what's driving some of that. Looking at some of this data, we've got a sort of table that sets out categories of like Black British, Asian, it's very broad brush categories. And I just wondered whether somewhere we have better data than this about those different communities. Because, for example, the question about, is this about a younger population, is going to vary massively according to which group you're talking about. So does that data exist, or is that something that we're working towards getting to have that understanding?
Within the stroke data, the national audit data, it isn't particularly good in terms of breaking down the ethnic groups into those groups. So I think it's something that we absolutely need to look at. I think when we looked at the population breakdown of those areas, we weren't a million miles away from seeing the same in the data. And we know that the populations differ, don't they, in terms of how they're structured. So I think it's something absolutely we need to look at. And I've been having a chat with Barbara, our public health data analyst, about how can we look at some of the outcome data in a bit more detail. So that could be something I pick up with her.
Wendy.
You mentioned, and thank you for the report, very insightful. You mentioned about the Heart Health Alliance. Yeah. You know, we know in Barnsley our alliance building approaches really, we can't tell you how many we've got, but anyway, this is another great one, which is really about the mobilisation of folks that have got a health professional background, people from the voluntary community sector, other people such as social care, voluntary community, all the sorts of people that come together to really try and understand what's going on in our town, really, and then mobilise themselves to try and deliver effects. So I'm really pleased that you talked about the work that's going to be taking place with that group, really. Gabriel, I'm just going to sort of reflect upon our visit to Kendry Hospital when we went and visited the integrated care, the stroke pathway, and you know how sort of it was really interesting, wasn't it? Some of the messages that they gave us about how people just work together really well. And my colleague there mentioned about the significant role of the voluntary and community sector and how the Stroke Association particularly have really wedged themselves into that pathway so that people were really working in a truly inclusive way to deliver the change. But clearly, even more to head upstream as we, do even more of that campaign work in and amongst our neighbourhoods. So, yeah, great to see it. Thank you for sharing it.
David, Jamie, that was great. Thank you very much. Lovely to see you, and thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Okay, next item is primary care devolution, pharmacy, optometry, dentistry. An update from you, Anthony, yes?
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and apologies to members for the verbal update. That's very much down to the timeframes, which I'll come to and cover as I just give the update to members. You'll remember in November I brought a paper to the board that gave a position statement in terms of where we were from a confidence perspective in terms of delegation of pharmacy, optometry and dentistry for April 2023. And I also took the opportunity in our time out to give a further update last month. Back in November, we supported the direction of travel for delegation, but we noted the risks and made a number of caveats. If I could just remind members what they are. Throughout the process, we insisted upon full transparency of information detail on staffing functions, etc. The second one was on the proviso that the appropriate resources, financial, staffing, knowledge, came as part of the delegation process to allow our ICB to discharge these functions well. And this included not just a safe landing of functions, but we were fit for purpose to allow transformation and improvement in the future and take advantage of the opportunities that delegation allows. And the third caveat was that we ensured we had the appropriate governance of the ICB to give reassurance that the functions will be discharged effectively and efficiently. I can now bring the board up to date on the further progress we've made on each of these areas and also discuss the next steps. And I'll cover them in relation to staffing and resource, finance and governance. And what I'll try to demonstrate, Chair, is an increasing level of confidence about this process, but also some more work to be done over the course of the next 4 weeks. So in terms of staffing and resource, it remains the case that the functions of delegation will transfer to the ICBs on the 1st of April and that the NHS England staff will transfer on the 1st of July. Now, this creates some additional work on arrangements between April and July, and then from July 23rd onwards. But I've got more confidence that these are in hand now. For those enabling functions that remain with NHS England, Arrangements for the ICB to access continual support will be covered by a series of memorandums of understanding, and we have had the opportunity to comment and input onto those to ensure that these arrangements are clear. We've also looked at the lower resource that we have around Yorkshire and Humber dental teams, and we've taken the decision in discussion with other ICBs that Humber and North Yorkshire ICB would be the host employer of the dental teams, but capacity and capability across ICBs will obviously allow us to access those teams appropriately, and we're confident that hosting arrangements will mitigate some of those risks, but we continue to work through what that will mean in practice. Since our last update, NHS England have now confirmed that the staff and associated pay budgets transferring with community pharmacy and optometry and dentistry functions. There's ongoing due diligence work to be undertaken between the ICB and NHS England to work through the position, but Lee, I'm now more confident in terms of the budgets that are coming across. On the positive front on that, we already have good working relationships between our Place and South Yorkshire teams with the NHS England teams. We've worked aligned for several years now, and we're already looking about how we can integrate those teams across the primary care capacity that we already have. Obviously, there's people behind this, isn't there? So we are really committed to make NHS England staff feel welcome. We've had a series of engagement meetings which are now taking place with the help of Christine's team. We're responding to questions and concerns that those staff are, but I feel now confident that they're being made welcome on the 1st of July. And in terms of spreading that knowledge of dentistry, optometry and pharmacy across our ICB, we're holding a number of webinars for ICB colleagues to build up knowledge and understanding of the functions that are transferring. They've been really well attended and are going well. I've mentioned that we've got the memorandum of understanding that allows that access to associated support staff staying with NHS England. And members are aware that we've created a strong primary care alliance, which includes clinical representation and medical representation of community pharmacy, optometry and dental, and they're charged with our refresh of our primary care strategy. That's an update in terms of staffing and resource. In terms of finance, we've received confirmation of the pod allocations for 23-24. I'm told that's £163 million. Shadow monitoring in 22-23 and the financial plan for 23-24 at the moment does not indicate any significant financial risks inherent in the allocations. I hope I'm right in saying that. That's where we are from a finance perspective. In terms of governance, you remember that we've got a series of safe delegation checklists around that. We have weekly meetings locally and with NHS England around that, and a series now of task and finish groups looking at that. We had an all-encompassing workshop on the 10th of February that brought all the ICBs together to look at any remaining identifiable risks and the mitigation that we'll put in as a result of that. There remains extremely tight deadlines about some of those risks and about some of those due diligence. And just to give the board an example of the sort of things that they are, assets, IT and records, the things that were held at NHS England that now need to be held at the ICB. Complaints, Mark, we've set up a task and finish group to look at that particular function, which the board, I'm sure, will realise is quite heavy when we look at something around dentistry. So our ability to have the right capacity to deal with that. So there's still some nuts and bolts to work through. In terms of governance and how we make decisions come April, we've still got to have some discussions internally about how that will be done, where those decisions are made, and how we make them safe, but also timely and flexibly for us to get on with them with the actual transformation work. And I'm working with Mark's team in terms of that. I don't see us being very different to the other ICBs, but there's some nuts and bolts to just work that through. We've committed as the ICBs to do a joint paper to our boards. Now, with us being on the 1st of March, I wasn't quite ready to bring that joint paper because the boards of Humber and North Yorkshire, West Yorkshire, etc. are later on in the month. In terms of reassurance for members here, then what I suggest is that I work with Kevin and the chairs of the other committees, and there's an opportunity on the 15th of March with a meeting with the chair to bring up to speed on where we are there. And then my final suggestion would be to piggyback on the meeting at the end of March that we discussed there. If we have a wider invite of people to say, this is where we are, I can recommend that we take over the delegation of those three functions. I hope that serves as an update. There's more work to be done, but I do feel more confident than where I was a month or so ago.
Okay, so we had significant doubts. It's feeling better, but still not enough to say to us today, you must do it. Process throughout this month, and we'll look at it. See it on the 15th of March, which Kevin's involved in, and then the 30th of March, we'll take a judgment then. Is that what you're saying?
Please.
People comfortable with it? Chris?
Yes, thanks, Anthony's done a brilliant job with this, actually, just saying that. So I think the key thing is with Anthony is if we can deliver this, which is the direction of travel that's set, is that what we will get is a transactional resource.
Yes, I know.
So the ambitions we've got around dentistry and reducing health inequality is absolutely set, but we don't have that resource coming with it, do we? So what would success have looked like? So at Place, there's 40 dentists in Rotherham. I have no relationship with them currently. I'd need to have developed relationships, have quality arrangements with them. That's the sort of thing we'd go for the next step. But at this step, this is transactional arrangements.
Thanks, Chris. I think that's a really good way of describing it. This, you know, with the work to go on over the next 4 weeks, this is an element of landing it safely as it is at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah.
What we've got to then take the advantages of the opportunities, I say, that delegation comes to ICBs, which is that transformation work with wider primary care partners, and that will form a big part. We're not waiting for that when we're putting together our primary care strategy, which is to really get involved in that kind of thing.
Mark and then Lee.
It's actually probably a question for me, actually. We might not know the answer yet, but I think when we discussed it last time, we were unclear whether the required running cost reductions within these services or not. And I'm just wondering if we know yet and what impact that might have in the future.
Good question, Mark. Lee.
I genuinely think that Hull and East Yorkshire hosting this helps us. I was really worried about the kind of left toenail of very specialist skills arriving in South Yorkshire. How we're going to manage that interface. So I think that's hugely positive. But I'm still not clear, Mark, on in the context of NHS England cost reductions and the potential for ICB running cost reductions, how this is working now in terms of shrink and then shift versus shift and then shrink. And that's the bit that I'm still most nervous about. If we accept we're getting a relatively transactional resource that can keep the services running as is, noted. But I do think we've got to nail this. What is the absolute expectation around interface with this delegated service and the potential for management cost reductions at the ICB and the extent requirement for management cost reductions at NHS England? We could add that as a footnote to our conversation on Friday, perhaps, Gavin.
Yeah, I mean, I do think we know management cost reductions for us is coming. We haven't been formally notified. It's a conversation we need with the whole board, probably an informal in April, depending on what we hear. We've warned people about that. But there's a management cost reduction at the centre, and I don't know where it stands as a result of that.
Yeah, as things stand, this is what I was saying around the budget coming across. The full allocation, if you like, from the NHS England teams coming across will come in its entirety. So I see that as a shift and then shrink.
And the reduction will be
for us to deal with. The bigger risk, in my opinion, is those support functions that will stay with the NHS England teams, who I assume then will be subject to their own efficiency programmes. And we've got to continue to work closely through our memorandum of understanding and with the NHS England teams to see that we can still access and use those functions.
Like complaints.
Absolutely.
So I think the answer is feels a bit better, but we're not there yet. Is that a fair summary? We'll take a judgment later in the month and possibly have a conversation about this on the 30th. People comfortable with that? Okay. Thank you for that. Another devolution issue, which is specialist commissioning. Emma.
Thank you, Chair. So the purpose of the paper is to update members on the status of the devolution delegation of specialist commissioning.